This page of N64 Magazine looks like they're banging on about Star Wars Episode 1. Racer, bless 'em. First play all the tracks. Remember the hype for that pod racing thing? Probably looked alright at the time, I suppose. Then you've got Jet Force Gemini. Always worth a look when Rare are involved. New pics and info, they're saying. Must be some blockbusting space blaster if they're hyping it up like that. Duke Nukem. 0 hours tipped, which is magazine speak for we've played a bit of it. Mario Party's still hanging about. And Turok 2. Dinosaurs and Guns. Classic N64. And of course they're still giving away that Planet Game Boy Plus mag, the world's only dedicated Game Boy magazine. Bit much, isn't it? June 99, issue 29, a whole £2.95 it set you back. Madness. This page is the welcome page for N64 Magazine, and they're not shy about telling you how great they are, claiming to be Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo mag. They go on about their honest reviews because they're independent from Nintendo, and they cover games from Japan and America, but focus on the stuff you can actually buy over here, which makes sense. They're also keen to point out they don't do rumors, just proper news from their folks in Europe, Japan and America. Bit of a dig at other mags, telling you not to be fooled by feeble imitations. Then there's the editor, Tim Weaver's bit, under the title, It's a Bit of Beard Science. He's clearly been glued to Star Wars. Episode 1 Racer reckons the plot is simple enough, and they've got a big special investigation on it later in the mag. Jet Force Gemini is mentioned as a sci-fi game on the horizon, probably something to look out for. Sounds like someone called Martin has been playing Premier Manager 64, trying to take Blackburn to the top, and even managed to sit next to Arsene Wenger in the game. Lucky sod. There's a mention of a Shadowman diary starting in this issue, which could be interesting if you're into that sort of thing. And a new Super Tough Games challenge is kicking off somewhere in the mag too. Looks like your typical packed issue. All the usual N64 stuff you'd expect from June 1999. This page, right, it's the contents page from an old N64 magazine. Must be issue 29, June 99. Takes me back. So first up you've got Planet 64, which was their news bit. Looks like they were covering E3, talking about all the big games coming and some awards for Smash Bros. Live, which was probably the multiplayer tourney. Page 12 for that. Then, coming soon on page 16, previews of games on the horizon. Mario Golf, yeah, I remember that one. WWF Attitude, bit of wrestling. Quake 2, always good for some shooting. And Army Men. Sarge's Heroes, those little green plastic soldiers. Wonder if they were any good. Next section, N64 Arena on page 54, the reviews. Mystical Ninja 2, that's Goismon, the blue-haired fella. Konami, they always made some quirky stuff. Lode Runner 3D, blimey, an update to that old 80s puzzle game. Who'd have thought it? And then budget reviews, page 61, cheap games they reckoned were worth a punt. Mario Kart 64, Wave Race 64, Lilat Wars or Star Fox 64, as normal people called it Snowboard Kids, and F1 World Grand Prix. Decent selection for a budget range, you know. Import Arena on page 64, for all your Japanese and American games. Pokemon Snap, the monster photo game, that was a bit different. Rampage Universal Tour, frankly they didn't rate it much. And Triple Play 2000 Baseball, wonder if that was any good to us Brits. Down the bottom the regulars bit, Information Station, N64 Shopper for import bits, N64 Magazine issue 30 feet teasing next month's mag, and What If? With Mr. Nukem getting the alternate reality treatment. Lastly, Planet Game Boy, page 35, dedicated to Nintendo's handheld. The world's only dedicated Game Boy magazine, it reckons. Blimey, dedicated just to the Game Boy? Madness. Still, some people liked it. Boring to me. That's about it for the contents page. Pretty standard stuff for the time, really. This page of the magazine is the contents page. In it, right at the start of the mag, looks like we're in for a good issue. Ledgery. First up, Future Look. Big headline, promising a first glimpse at new N64 games. Always exciting back then to see what was coming up next. It says it starts on page 6, so we'll have to flip over and see what gems they're teasing. Mewful. Then we've got sections for different games dotted around. Jet Force Gemini, yeah, that Rare game they were hyping up at the time. New shots from Rare's latest blockbuster, it says. Remember that one being quite the looker. Then, Monster Truck Madness. Massive racing mayhem apparently. Seemed alright for a bit of mindless fun. And blimey, Michael Owen's WLS 99. Can't say I was ever massive on footy games, but I suppose if you were a Liverpool fan, seeing young Owen on the N64 was probably a big deal. The latest look at this Ace footy game. Ace is pushing it a bit, lads. Big splash for Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, with special investigation. The best Star Wars game yet? Bit of a bold claim, considering some of the classics they had before. We scour every inch of this Wipeout beta. Wipeout beta? Steady on, it was alright, but Wipeout was Wipeout. And you could win Star Wars Lego, apparently. Always a bonus. Jew. Premier Manager 64 inches is there too. Football management comes to the N64. Never understood the appeal of those games myself, but someone must have liked them. Then there's the regular features, N64 Club 64, the ultimate reader service. Mailbox. Always a laugh reading other people's letters and seeing if yours got in. How to. Section with Duke Nukem 0 Hour. Kick ass and chew bubblegum in Duke Nukem 0 Hour. Bit cliché, but Duke was Duke, wasn't he? Monaco Grand Prix and Castlevania are in the How To section too. Help wanted for Rogue Squadron. Tips extra for tippery action, whatever that means. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. The Kitster in action. Sounds a bit cringe, that. Hotline tips, Nintendo themselves helping you out, that's always useful. Game On, with slightly unusual game challenges. I'm the best. Top times transcribed. Skill Club 64 inches. Are you good enough to be in the club? Contacts, directory for all the games, subscriptions and back issues. All the usual magazine stuff. And right at the bottom, multiplayer compo, at Virgin Megastores, details of the grand final in London. Bet that was a bit of a day out for someone. And, Nintendo family trees. What has GoldenEye influenced? Find out here. Ruh. GoldenEye's influence, eh? Probably everything, back then. Ruh. So yeah, looks like a decent issue, covering a good range of games, some new ones coming out, and the usual bits and bobs. Right then, let's see what Future Look is all about on page 6. This page from N64 Magazine is a future look at some of the big games coming to the console. This is issue 29 by the looks of it, so probably mid to late 99. The main game they are banging on about is Jet Force Gemini. As usual with Rare games back then, it was massively hyped and seemingly delayed every issue. They're saying here it was meant to be out in March but is now slated for the end of August. Typical. They're raving about the graphics, and yeah, from the screenshots, it does look pretty slick for the N64, especially the one with the red-haired girl Vela, I reckon, showing off those horror movie eyes. Bit dramatic. Apparently it's a mix of Banjo-Kazooie and a shooter, with loads of alien insects to blast. You get to play as Juno, Vela, and even a flying dog called Lupus, or some droid called Floyd. Sounds like a right old mix, doesn't it? They're also mentioning co-op and deathmatch multiplayer, which was always a good shout back then to get your mates round. They've also got a little bit about Monster Truck Madness. Sounds a bit daft, but probably a laugh for a bit. And then there's Michael Owen's soccer. 99 Silicon Dreams were knocking out the football games then, weren't they? They reckon it's brilliant, we'll see about that. Apparently their Jess Bickham is off to E3 and will be playing Jet Force Gemini, Perfect Dark and Donkey Kong. Always good to get the early word in it. They're promising a proper look at Jet Force Gemini next month, so we'll have to wait and see if it lives up to the hype, as Rare games usually did, to be fair. This page in the mag is all about Jet Force Gemini, back when we were all wondering how Rare were going to pull off a decent 3D shooter on the N64. The headline is Mission Possible, which is a bit cheeky referencing that Mission Impossible game, though they do admit that game wasn't exactly brilliant. They're talking about how Jet Force Gemini might handle the shooting and platforming combo without it being a right faff to switch weapons and all that, suggesting it'll have a camera system a bit like Mission Impossible, zooming in close for shooting. There are a few screenshots, one showing the HUD, which they admit they don't know what it's for yet, and say we'll find out next month. Another screenshot shows some in-game action, looking quite colourful, which they big up as being beautiful, and tell us to ignore the nasty eyeballs. There's also artwork of the characters, these two kids, and that dog, Lupus I think he was called, holding some hefty looking weapons. Down at the bottom there's a release date box saying August for the UK and US, and that it's from Rare obviously, and is 14 players. There's also a little jab about fogging, saying people at Rare clearly don't know what the word means based on the screenshot, which is a bit harsh but maybe fair enough back then when we were all used to a bit of fog in our 3D games on the N64. It ends saying we'll have to wait a bit longer for the full review, but Lucky Jess is playing it in LA. Typical. This page shows a future look at a game called Monstruma on the N64, from issue 29 of N64 Magazine. It seems to be a first playtest of this fruity four-wheeler, whatever that means. They've got a few screenshots dotted around showing monster trucks in action. It seems to be a bit like Mario Kart, but with monster trucks and a bit more rough and tumble. One of the captions mentions power-ups, calling a green object a power-up. Very Mario Kart, sort of. Another talks about rumble mode, where you have to stay on a platform and ram opponents off, which sounds like a bit of silly fun. They point out you can bounce most objects around, and that big jumps are possible. Huge jumps are eminently possible in Monster Team Madness, they say, sounding a bit too enthusiastic there. One of the screenshots shows snow that settles as you play, which is a nice touch, I suppose. It also mentions sharp cornering being needed and being pretty snappy too, so maybe it's not just mindless monster truck smashing. Overall, it looks like a bit of daft, arcadey fun for the N64, probably not going to set the world alight, but might be a laugh with mates. Boom, as they say about the rockets. Right then. This page is having a look at Monster Truck Madness on the N64. It's a game based on the PC game of the same name, and they're making a big deal about the multiplayer, especially the soccer mode, which sounds a bit daft but could be a laugh with mates. Apparently you can have up to 4 players bouncing a massive football around in monster trucks, which is literally Monster Truck Madness, as they say. They're talking about power-ups too, the usual missiles and turbo boosts, but also a hover thingy, which sounds a bit Back to the Future, and a super jump to fly about. It's coming out in July in the States, but we'll have to wait until August or September over here in the UK. Edge of Reality are the developers, and they've gone all in on multiplayer. Besides the daft soccer, there's standard races, circuit races, and even a police chase mode, where one player is the police trying to nab the others. They mention 20 different monster trucks to choose from. It sounds like they're trying to make the most of the 4 controller ports on the N64. They also mention weather effects, like racing in the dark or in the rain and snow, which is a nice touch. They reckon it's still early days for the game, but it's shaping up well, though they did think the handling was a bit vague and slippy in the version they played. Hopefully they'll sort that out before it's released in late summer. This page is a look at Michael Owen's soccer on the N64. Back in the day it was hyped as the latest footy game. Looking at these screenshots, they were saying it was a big improvement visually. They're banging on about how high as it is without needing an expansion pack, which was a big deal then for the N64, needing extra bits just to make games look decent. They mention the players are individually sculpted, and have different faces and expressions, which in '99 was pushing it a bit for graphics in a football game, wasn't it? They're also saying the game whips along at a rare old pace, and that the stadiums are detailed. From the text it sounds like earlier versions had some issues with dodgy looking player models. Necks in particular apparently were a bit of a mess and the pitch had bumps, but they were still excited about it, saying it felt absolutely fantastic even with problems. Bit keen, weren't they? But fair enough, everyone was gagging for a decent footy game on the N64, and Michael Owen was the big name at the time, so it probably shifted a few copies. There are a few screenshots of the gameplay, showing Cameroon versus England, and Leeds United versus Manchester United. They've highlighted the AI and player detail, which is what they were pushing as the big selling points. Skidding in and breaking legs sounds about right for a 90s footy game. Didn't always go for realism back then. This page is all about Michael Owen's Soccer 99 on the N64. Blimey, that feels like a lifetime ago. It's a future look piece, so it's previewing the game before it came out back in September '99. The screenshots they've got here show off a few bits and bobs. They're banging on about how the different weather conditions affect the matches, and how Croatia look happy because they are in hires, which was probably a big deal back then, I suppose. There's a bit about an icy pitch being good for industrial tackles, cheeky. And they mention the different camera viewpoints should be comfy, and the stadiums are gorgeous, apparently as sharp as Jess's wit pranny. Alright then, they reckon it's a bit like sensible soccer, but better too. Bold claim, lads. Reading the text, it seems they are impressed with being able to make your own match highlights and watch full match replays if you had extra memory, which again, was a novelty at the time. They were raving about a special dribbling move, holding Z to keep the ball glued to your feet while sprinting, and tapping Z to glide past defenders. Sounds a bit like cheating, really. They mention combo moves with shoulder buttons, like toe punt finishes and bullet-like through balls. Scoring is supposed to be varied, with scissor kicks, looping headers and volleys. Ooh yes, bit of a dig about it not having official licenses, so there are awful lot of real names missing for the teams. But they seemed pretty chuffed overall, saying they were astonished by it and reckon it's the beautiful game kicking while the sun's out. Bit much, isn't it? But in June '99, they were excited for a review coming soon. Simpler times. This page from issue 29 of N64 Magazine, June 1999, is getting us hyped for E3, or at least trying to. E3 is go, the headline shouts. A bit dramatic really. They're saying Nintendo's gonna bring the big guns to the show. There are a few screenshots to whet the appetite. Donkey Kong, looking a bit rough around the edges, Perfect Dark doing its moody thing, and Mario, inexplicably, playing golf. Game-wise, the big hitters are there. Perfect Dark, of course. Everyone wanted to know if it could live up to GoldenEye. Donkey Kong 64 was another rare game, always a safe bet back then. Then there's Eternal Darkness, attempting to be a bit spooky in a Resident Evil kind of way. They've got the usual sports titles like F1 World Grand Prix 2, Ken Griffey Slugfest, Kobe Bryant 2, and Mario Golf. Jet Force Gemini is mentioned, which was a bit of a weird one, and even new Tetris for the puzzle fans. Looking further down, there's Ogre Battle 3, Pokemon Snap and Stadium, Ridge Racer 64 for the racers, a sci-fi platformer called Rika, Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, and oddly enough StarCraft, a PC strategy game, on the N64. A bit of everything then, some promising, some less so, pretty standard E3 fare. The next page in this issue then, right, let's have a gander. Looks like the shortcuts section is kicking things off, moaning about ISS 2000 not getting a PAL release. Typical Konami, eh? They did manage to dig up some proof of its existence last month though, so swings and roundabouts. Oh, and Duke Nukem 0 Hour, that's been shunted back to June 25th. Apparently Nintendo are too busy making sure there are enough copies of that Star Wars Episode 1 racer game, mind you. Probably fair enough, that pod racing game is supposed to be a bit of alright. Least Duke's a 90% rated star game according to these lots, so it'll be worth the wait, they reckon. Right, the nominees are Tendulk section. Seems Nintendo games are in for some awards, like a Shakespeare in Love type of thing, whatever that means for games. Banjo-Kazooie, Rogue Squadron, and Zelda, Ocarina of Time are all up for gongs at the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Awards bash. That's the second annual one apparently. Zelda is expected to clean up at the games industry Oscars, they're saying here. Bit bold, aren't they? Other contenders are Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, Grim Fandango, Half-Life, and Alpha Centauri on PC. If Zelda doesn't win with all those numbers it's getting, then it'll be a travesty according to this magazine. Strong words. Fighting Game of the Year has WCW/NWO Revenge and WWF Warzone nominated. Wrestling games, naturally. Racing Game of the Year has XG2 and F-Zero X in the running, and Zelda on the Game Boy is battling it out with Pokemon for RPG of the Year. Sports game category is apparently dominated by N64 games, with 4 out of 5 nominations, mentioning NBA Courtside, NFL Blitz, and Quarterback Club 99. They are saying the Academy members might have overlooked IS-98 though. A bit harsh maybe. Anyway, they'll have the results in the next issue. We'll see if Zelda really does clean up. Then there's a bit about a Slamfest. Some bizarre live Smash Bros. Rumble at E3. Sounds like a right laugh. They had Yoshi, Pikachu and Donkey Kong all dressed up. And Mario was there too. A bit of a scrap in Vegas and broadcast over the internet. Apparently, the ref got involved and tasted like chicken. Whatever that means. They're saying it was an honourable draw in the end. Thankfully no real bloodshed. Just Pikachu apparently biting Yoshi's ear. Sounds like a right carry-on. Warrington. Lastly, Planet Game Boy. Their own standalone mag. Apparently the Game Boy section has become a parent. Whatever that means. Bit dramatic. It's meant to be the ultimate guide for Game Boy owners. With a Zelda DX map of Koholint Island in there, that's a nice touch. It's got tips, cheats, in-depth reviews and previews of Pokemon, and it's out now for £3.50 with free batteries. Can't say fairer than that, might have to pick that up for the commute. There's a picture of the cover, looks like some lass holding a Game Boy Color. Fun size, it says, and 35 games reviewed. Zelda, Link's Awakening DX, Mario Land 2, Power Quest, Top Rank, Silly Shadowgate, Rugrats, Tetris DX and more. Mapped and mastered. 16-page Zelda solution, not bad for £3.50. This page is looking at some new bits and bobs for the N64, plus a peek at some fanzines, remember them? First off, there's a bit about Mech-Up, or Last Legion UX as it's properly called. Apparently it's looking a bit like Sega's Virtual On, which was a decent mech battler back in the day, especially in the arcades. They reckon it's got split screen, which is always good for a bit of multiplayer scrap with your mates. Jaeger. Then there's a quick mention of Nuclear Winter, or Nuclear Strike. Coming to the N64, is it? That Strike series was alright, proper simple fun, blowing stuff up with choppers and jets. 15 vehicles to drive, they say. Sounds like a laugh. Moving on to the fanzine's proper bedroom publishing this, in it. First one is N64, 4EVER. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? Apparently it's Italian, but thankfully for us Brits, it's in English. They liked Resident Evil 64, which wasn't too bad for a bit of zombie blasting on the N64, and they mention Monaco Grand Prix. Must be that racing game. Probably not a patch on Mario Kart though. Sounds like a decent enough fanzine for a bit of a read while you're having your tea. Warrington. Next up is N64 Planet. This one sounds like it's been having a good month. Loads of tomato plants in the garden apparently. They've reviewed Mario Golf and Banjo-Kazooie, both cracking games. And Zelda gets a mention. No surprise there, everyone was banging on about Zelda back then. They reckon it's a bit wordy but good for a read in the bath. Each to their own, I suppose. Bah. Games Dungeon is another fanzine, apparently it's the second one from them. They're into multi-format stuff, not just N64. They didn't rate Banjo-Kazooie as much as Spyro. Bit harsh maybe, Banjo was alright. But they do have hints and tips, which is always handy if you get stuck on a level. War. Then on to the gear. There's a Joytech expansion pack. Third-party one, eh? Always a bit dodgy going third-party, but apparently it's alright. Doesn't get as hot as the Nintendo one, which is a bonus I guess. 90%, not bad. AJ. South Park keyrings are next. 20 quid for a set? Blimey. Apparently South Park merch was flying off the shelves back then. Sounds like a bit of a kerfuffle over a Kenny keyring at lunchtime. Kids, eh? Cigar. Lastly, the Race 64. Shock 2 steering wheel. 50 quid. Bit steep. Gearmot made those, didn't they? Rumble effect, they say. Better than the juddering ones we've seen before, apparently. They reckon it's alright for pinpoint racing control. 85%, not bad for a wheel. Probably better off sticking to the control pad for Mario Kart though, let's be honest. Orange. So yeah, that's the page. A bit of everything, games, fanzines and some peripherals. Typical N64 mag from back in the day. This page is a retro gaming bit, looks like Jason Moore's section. He's kicking things off, talking about Famicom games, you know, the Japanese NES, saying there's loads of games you can get for it. Bit of a dig at the text being in Japanese, which makes buying them a bit of a gamble, but he reckons it's part of the charm. First up is Technos 1, which sounds like a multi-event sports game. A bit like Konami's Track and Field, he says. There's a screenshot of the game, looks pretty basic, but he mentions you can choose characters who look a bit like Sylvester Stallone from Rocky, which is a laugh. He says you have to hammer the buttons to run, and reckons it's alright if you've got mates to play with. Interstellar. Then there's Technos 2, another Famicom title. This one's a beat-em-up but with martial arts. He says you play a fighter with glasses. Sounds a bit nerdy, and it's like Double Dragon. The play area is a big island, and you wander about looking for bad guys to punch. Again, another screenshot, looks very typical of the time. Amigai. Next is NECA 2, yet another Famicom sports game, but this one's multi-event too, with running, hurdles, throwing things. He says it's like Technos 1 foot, but with more to it. You can even punch and kick your mates. The hurdles break, and you can throw a hammer, even into water hazards. Sounds a bit daft but maybe fun with mates after a few pints. Finally, Lode Runner on the Famicom, a classic platform game. He calls it a classic, says you collect gold and avoid baddies, digging holes to trap them with your spade. He reckons it's simple, but addictive, and a prime example of retro gaming. At the top there's a little Quake 2 bit, mentioning a spy at id Software who saw Quake 2 feat on the N64, and that John Carmack is happy with the conversion, which is good news considering he apparently doesn't like console Quakes. Review coming soon, they say. Down the side, there's a bit about Quake 2 figures, action figures like. They're calling them Excitement Direct, bit much isn't it? £15 quid a pop. They're raving about them, saying they are the best figures they've seen, especially the Strog Tank, which is heavy and part metal, part plastic with working missiles. Sounds alright if you're into that sort of thing. They've given them 92%, which is a bit generous if you ask me. They are just toys after all. Then at the bottom there's a competition with Ubisoft to win a wheel, and Monaco Grand Prix game which got 87% in issue 27. Question is, Batmobile or Knight Rider? Bit of a silly question, but alright I suppose. You have to send your entries to some address in Bath. And that's about it for this retro roundup. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at some of the games coming out soon on the old N64. Seems like they're previewing a few titles this month. Things like Quake 2, Winback, Mario Golf and a few others are mentioned. The main focus seems to be on Quake 2, which was a bit of a big deal back then on PC. They're saying this N64 version is looking rather good, even better than the PC original apparently. Roster Productions are working on it, and have supposedly added 19 new levels specifically for the N64, which sounds alright. They're also banging on about how it's got much more colour than the PC version, moving away from the grey look. Good news for those who like a bit of colour I suppose. Cora. The reviewer is going on about the multiplayer being smooth and fast, which is always key for a decent shooter. They also mention the weapons, from the basic pistol all the way to the railgun and rocket launcher. You know, the usual suspects. There are some screenshots dotted about with captions like, "The railgun is by far the best gun in the game." Well, fancy that. Another one says, "Some kind of hideous flying beast. Best kill it quickly, eh?" Very insightful. There's also one of a dog-like thing which they're calling a parasite, with a deadly tongue. Charming. They were hoping to review Quake 2 this month, but it's been pushed back to later in the summer. Typical. Still, they seem quite chuffed with how it's shaping up, and are promising a proper review when they get their hands on a copy. So yeah, Quake 2 on the N64, Could be a laugh if it runs alright. This page features a preview of Winback, coming out on the N64. It's from Koei, who you might know from those strategy games, but this one's a bit different, a third-person shooter apparently. They're saying it's trying to be like GoldenEye and Mission Impossible, which were the big spy games back then, weren't they? They reckon Nintendo had a hand in making sure it was decent, which is always a good sign. The reviewer mentions it's going for smooth analog controls, which is a dig at the old digital controls we were used to. A fair point, to be honest. Those digital controls could be a bit clunky sometimes. Plots something about terrorists and a satellite, the usual sort of thing. You play as a fella called Jean-Luc Cougar, and apparently he's got some fancy moves, like rolling around corners and locking onto enemies. Sounds pretty nifty. They mention a 2-player deathmatch mode. Shame there's no 4-player, everyone was always wanting 4-player back then. The screenshots look alright. A bit dark, maybe? Typical for these kinds of games at the time. One of the captions even jokes about whether a character is dancing or been shot. Bit of light humor there. They reckon it could be a surprise hit, even if it looks a bit basic. Fingers crossed it turns out alright. We were always on the lookout for decent shooters on the N64, weren't we? This page is all about Mario Golf on the N64, remember that? Christ, golf games were a bit naff back then, weren't they? Mostly just really boring simulators, and then Nintendo comes along with Mario Golf. The review is called Birdie Song, bit cheesy, but alright. It talks about how standard golf games on the N64 before this were a bit rubbish, mentioning Glory of St. Andrews and YLA Country Club. Hardly classics, were they? But Mario Golf is trying to inject some Nintendo magic into the mix. They mention Camelot are developing it, the same team behind Hot Shots on the PlayStation, which they reckon was the best golf game before this, and that Mario Golf has good physics and ball behavior. They're saying it's easy to pick up but with enough depth, talking about different clubs and realistic effects. The reviewer reckons they've seen quite a bit of the game already, mentioning green and red shells as course features. Classic Mario stuff. They're also excited about power-ups and secrets. There are 6 courses, and they sound quite varied based on different Mario games, even Zelda apparently, with changing daylight conditions too. Sounds a bit more interesting than your average golf course, doesn't it? Or, it mentions Mario-style power-ups and secrets, and reckons there will be 10 Nintendo characters, including Mario, Luigi, Peach, and some secret ones. One screenshot shows a girl character, and they're wondering who she is, a secret character maybe. Another shot is of a bloke they think looks like Tim's dad, whoever Tim is, maybe someone on the mag? Boo! Release-wise, it says it's coming out in September in the US and hopefully in the UK in winter, bundled with a Game Boy pack for swapping data between the N64 and Game Boy versions, which is a cool idea for the time. They seem pretty positive overall, and think it will be good fun, and they're hoping it comes out soon. Looking at the screenshots, yeah, it looks alright for a golf game. Bit colourful and cartoony, which is the point, I suppose. This page in the magazine has got a look at a couple of upcoming games for the old N64. First up is Formula 2, which is actually Formula 1 World Grand Prix 2. Looks like Paradigm are back for another go at the F1 sim, and to be honest, looking at the screenshots it does look rather similar to the first game. They're saying they've tweaked the handling and frame rate, and even the Canada track, which is fair enough, but visually it's not blowing anyone away, is it? Still, split screen is mentioned as a highlight, and back then that was always a good shout for multiplayer fun with your mates. Then we have Plastic Fantastic, which is about Army Men Sarge's Heroes. Remember the Army Men PC strategy game? Well, this is the N64 version, but they've gone down the 3D action route. They're saying it's a bit Tomb Raider, a bit Micro Machines, which sounds like a strange mix, but could be alright. Lots of weapons like shotguns and mortars and even a minesweeper. They're promising 4-player deathmatch too, and enhanced graphics over the PC version. It's based on playing with toy soldiers, so it's got that kind of Micro Machines vibe in terms of setting, battling around the house. Could be a bit of alright fun when it comes out later in the year, apparently. This page is talking about the upcoming wrestling game, WWF Attitude, on the N64. It seems like they're quite keen on it, saying it's the sequel to Warzone, which they quite liked back then. Apparently Attitude is going to be even better, with loads more wrestling moves, over 400 signature moves, blimey. They mention they've tarted up the graphics, running at 640 by 480, which was pretty swish for the N64. And it's supposed to be faster paced than Warzone. They're banging on about it being compatible with the expansion pack too. Wonder if that made much difference really. They are highlighting the creator player mode is better, and you can set up your own pay-per-view events, which sounds pretty in-depth for a wrestling game. And it's got commentary from Vince McMahon and Jim Rose, which if you were into your American wrestling you'd know who they were. All in all, they reckon it's something every wrestling fan should be looking forward to, and they'll review it properly in a couple of months, so we'll see about that. Elsewhere on the page, they're also mentioning a few other bits and bobs. There's talk of a game called Young Olympians. Sounds a bit daft, to be honest. Some action-adventure thing from the guys who did Biofreaks, which wasn't exactly a classic, let's be honest. Then Bomberman 64 2 is on the way, sequel to Bomberman 64, surprisingly, and they're saying it's focusing on the multiplayer, as you'd expect with Bomberman. Blimey, cartridges were getting big back then, weren't they? They're talking about Zelda, Ogre Battle 3, and Resident Evil 64 coming on massive carts, with Resident Evil 64 being a whopping 512 megabits. That was huge at the time. They're hoping it won't be too pricey, and they're right about that. Massy. Pokemon Stadium 2 is getting good scores in Japan, and we might get it in the UK later in the year. Lastly, the Glover people are doing a fantasy action RPG called Dragon Sword, with all the usual fantasy stuff like dwarves and mithril armor. Sounds alright if you're into that sort of thing, I suppose. This page is from Planet N64 Mag, looks like issue 29. Right then, flipping through, the main headline screams, "The WHITEC," in big letters. Always with news of hideous murderers, it says just underneath. Blimey, bit strong, isn't it? Oh, it's the WHITEC, as in Whitechapel. That makes more sense. Talking about Jack the Ripper, I suppose. But the headline is actually for a game called Shadowman. Seems to be an exclusive look at Shadowman, a game they are clearly hyping up. The editorial talks about it being a regular installment about Shadowman development, and mentions an August issue will have a review. They're trying to build anticipation, saying it's worth waiting for. Alright then. There's a section called A Distinguished Gentleman Speaks, an interview with Guy Miller from Acclaim, probably one of the developers. He's talking about increasing the cartridge size for Shadowman from 128 to 256 megabytes to include speech, rather than just text. Apparently this was Sir Greg Fishback's idea, Acclaim's president. Sounds expensive. They're discussing how the expansion pack will be used in Shadowman, and Guy Miller says it will let the game run in medium or highs. They're talking about a tangible in-game effect, which means using the expansion pack will actually change things in the game, not just graphics. Apparently plugging in the expansion pack lets you put things into a slot in your N64, which is always good fun, they reckon, especially if the thing is colored red. Subtle. Geekin'? There's a screenshot showing some rather gruesome looking action. Looks like a dark and moody game, some kind of voodoo vibe going on. Guy Miller describes the game as aiming for psychological style of horror, rather than just gore, but then immediately gives an example of shooting muzzled dogs dressed as semi-naked madmen. Right then, Ellie. Overall it's all about Shadowman really, trying to get everyone excited for it. Sounds a bit grim, but it's the kind of thing they were pushing back then. Darker, more mature games. This page from N64 Magazine, back in June 1999, is having a bit of a laugh, calling itself the HAPEL Times. It's all about Shadowman by the looks of it, focusing on exclusive interviews. There's a moody-looking fella in the top right, presumably Shadowman himself, and a few screenshots dotted about. Under the heading Man Shots, there's a bloke being attacked by some sort of pigman thing with a chainsaw charming. The text talks about being hunted by a serial killer with night vision goggles in a darkened tenement, and mentions nursery music and a naked female zombie. Sounds delightfully grim, doesn't it? Then we get to the exclusive interviews. It seems N64 Mag are chatting to a Guy Miller, who is the Shadowman senior designer. They ask about the voice acting, and he says they used professional actors, including Simon Phipps, and that he even did some himself. They also ask about Nintendo's reaction to the game's content, mentioning censorship and ugly heads on pointed sticks. Guy Miller reckons Nintendo have been supportive, especially with the ugly heads on pointed sticks, which is a bit of a weird thing to focus on, isn't it? Next up, they ask about gameplay length, wanting to know if it's still around 4,050 hours. Guy Miller says it'll be more like 7,080 hours according to their QA testers, filled with pure, unadulterated terror, and ugly heads on pointed sticks. Again, he's really hammering that point home. Apparently the interview had to be cut short because Mr. Miller was getting a bit unhinged, bless him. They promise more details next month when he's calmed down a bit. Over on the right, we've got Queensberry Rules, which is about the combat system in Shadowman. Apparently it's pretty much complete and doesn't have a Zelda-style lock-on, but Shadowman can hold an object in each hand for 2 weapon attacks. They reckon it's got over-the-top effects, and an arsenal that rivals Turok. Nice, they say. There are a couple more screenshots here, one showing a harpy-like creature, which apparently attacks from the air. A frightful affair, apparently. Finally, they ask Guy Miller about porting the game from PC to the N64, and the problems with fogging and blurriness that were common in third-party games. He says it was not hard at all. Very soft, in fact. Then, in a bit of a strange turn, they ask about serial killers, mentioning De Niro/Max Caddy style. Guy Miller then talks about the home improvement killer who makes furniture out of people's bits. Right then, sounds like Shadow Man was going to be a bit of a bonkers game, wasn't it? Typical 90s excess, really. This page then, it's all about the great multiplayer extravaganza. Looks like N64 Magazine and Virgin Megastores were teaming up for a big gaming do. They were looking for the best multiplayer gamer in the UK, apparently. It was going down at the Virgin Megastore on Oxford Street, back on Thursday the 3rd of June, so that would have been 99. Food and drink were promised, plus prizes, and a trophy for the top dog. Sounds like they were playing on the N64, obvious really given the name of the magazine, with Mario Kart 64 splashed all over the page there. They were even going to put it on the big screens in the shop. Bit much maybe. Anyway, if you wanted to know more, you had to read on. Seems like a bit of alright fun back in the day, wasn't it? This page is all about the great multiplayer extravaganza grand final competition details in N64 Magazine. It's laying out the entry requirements for 4 different games: Turok 2, Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye 007, and F-Zero X. For Turok 2, the challenge is to complete the first level in under 30 minutes. They even suggest using the Beware Oblivionized hand, cheat for invincibility, and infinite ammo, but warn you, it won't count as a genuine run if you do. Bit cheeky. They want video proof, showing the stats screen at the save point. Warrington Norcus. Mario Kart 64's challenge is Bowser's Castle in under 2 minutes 28 seconds. They reckon it's tricky and all about mastering the turbo turn and mention the thwomps and spiral tower. Top tip is to use mushrooms in the grassy bit, and secret corner turbos, and to hop to regain your line if you skid. Photo or video proof is needed. Blogruke. GoldenEye 007 is about accuracy on Bunker 2. You need 250% accuracy and have to kill at least 60 guards with infinite ammo allowed and all weapons available. They're talking up the shotgun and saying 500% is theoretically possible. The tip is about the slow, painful death of guards, and using the last video camera in the control room to set off alarms. Video proof is needed to prove no ammo or weapon cheats were used, with the score marked on the label. Sounds like a proper test of skill, not just blasting everything. Finally, F-Zero X is Devil's Forest 2, in under 1 minute 40 seconds. They say if you haven't done time attack yet, this is the time to start, calling it a real killer. They warn about the rippled section and losing energy if you're too quick. Top tip is not to boost too close to speed ups and use a craft with slightly more grip. Again, photo or video proof is fine. Yee. So, 4 classic N64 games, each with a specific challenge to prove your skills. It all needs to be sent to Multitowers, N64 Magazine in Bath by May 24th. Takes me back to those days of sending in VHS tapes to gaming mags. Good times, even if I was probably rubbish at most of these challenges back then, and probably still am now to be honest. This page is all about a big N64 multiplayer extravaganza they were running back in the day. It's breaking down how the final of some competition is going to work. Looks like 20 gamers are going to battle it out over 4 rounds, plus a bonus round. Round 1 is on 6 N64s, with groups of 3 or 4 players. Then they whittle it down to 12 for round 2, then 6 for round 3, and finally a grand final with 3 players. They even mention Team 64 turning up, and some bloke called Ashton to spice things up. Mendork. For the games, it's a proper blast from the past, isn't it? They're going with GoldenEye, obviously everyone was obsessed with that back then. Then there's Turok 2, F-Zero X, and Mario Kart. A good mix. You had to be pretty handy at all of them to do well, not just a GoldenEye wizard as they put it. Pikes. Down at the bottom there's some essential info for the finalists. Virgin Megastore, on Oxford Street in London, June 3rd, midday. Sounds like a right trek for some people, and you're stuck there all afternoon. Only 1 guest allowed too, bit stingy. And there's a voucher as well, £5 off an N64 game, costing £30 or more at Virgin Megastores. Not bad, could have saved you a bit of cash if you were still buying games then and hadn't rinsed your wallet on them already. Plus, they're plugging next month's magazine with the finalists in it. All good stuff takes you back, doesn't it? This page, right then, it's a special investigation into Star Wars Episode 1 racer for the N64. Seems they're having a good old look at this new racer based on that Phantom Menace film, remember that? It's got screenshots dotted around, showing off the pod racing, you know, like in the movie. There's the snowy track, which they reckon is a corridor of hurt, and you gotta keep the thumb on that analog stick. Then there's Tatooine, naturally, where they filmed the film apparently, good to know. They mention lining up pre-race, and the camera doing a bit of a circle around your pod racer. One of the screenshots says something about breaking a course record, with a flashing red lap time. And they're banging on about gorgeous track scenery, and feeling the force while racing. Bit much really, but you know how they get sometimes. And pelting through the ancient cities of Burunda, nice they say. So yeah, looks like they're quite keen on this pod racing game. This page is all about Star Wars Episode 1 Racer on the N64, right in the middle of the Star Wars hype back then. It's an N64 special investigation piece, it says, meaning they've gone all the way to LucasArts in California, bit of a trek in it. Apparently, it was all top secret before this, and now they're giving us the lowdown. The main headline is just Racer, in massive letters. They're banging on about how it's based on the film obviously, and how they finally got to play it. There are some screenshots showing off the pod racers, Watto, and some droids, and some in-game racing action. It mentions it's got 21 characters to choose from, and Anakin Skywalker is recommended for beginners, because his pod is stable and easy to handle, good to know for us less skilled gamers I suppose. They go on about the speed, saying it can reach 563 miles per hour, which is a bit bonkers really. They also mention other racers like Ebe Endicott, Ben Quadinaros and Sebulba, who's apparently a right git in the film and in the game. Other racers mentioned are Boozy Baranta, Toy Dampner, Team Topagales and Slide Parameter, quite a list there. Visually they're saying it uses the expansion pack to make it look better, and that the difference between the N64 and PC versions is massive. It seems like they are quite impressed by how it looks on the N64. Release dates are mentioned too, May 17th in the US and July 4th in the UK. Typical, we always get it later. Overall, it sounds like they are pretty excited about it, comparing it to F-Zero X, which is high praise indeed, even if they are being a bit cautious about saying it's better. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. Seems like 4-player was a no-go, something about the size of the cartridge being a bit tight, typical for back then. Still, they reckon the 2-player is alright. The Jet Force section is all about the speed and the tracks, 8 worlds and over 40 miles of track, which sounds pretty beefy. They're talking about the hangar, where you can choose your pod and have a fiddle with it, upgrades and whatnot. Then they just list a bunch of tracks: Tatooine, Ando Prime, Malastar, Barunda, Audibana, Mom Gaza, a fair few different planets then. And sounds, they're saying the music is streamed, a bit of a trick that, but not as amazing as Rogue Squadron's tunes apparently. They reckon the gameplay is a mix of F-Zero X and Wipeout, so fast and slick then. Could be a laugh if you're into Star Wars and racing games. This page is a look at Star Wars Episode 1, Racer. Seems like they're calling it Pod of Approval. They're talking about how good it looks, especially if you've got the expansion pack in your N64, to make things crisp. Apparently, it's hard to tell the difference between the N64 and PC versions, which is pretty impressive for the time. They mention fogging is kept to a minimum, and there's only a little pop-up, not too bad then. It's supposed to be like Rogue Squadron, but graphically not quite as hindering the action, which is a good thing. Moving on, they're on about the feel of the game, something about pods having points of gravity to make it realistic, especially on sharp corners. Sounds a bit fancy, doesn't it? They also mention it's like F-Zero X in terms of proceedings, which, yeah, I can see that. Yes sir. Speed-wise, they reckon it's well over 600 miles per hour, faster than Wipeout, which is saying something back then. There's this unique booster thing too. You fill it up and then get a kick of speed. Sounds are a bit of a letdown apparently. Unlike Rogue Squadron, which was amazing sound-wise on the N64, this racer game has resorted to streaming music, a bit like Shadows of the Empire. They say it's alright, but not as dazzling as Rogue Squadron, especially when it comes to hearing enemies coming up behind you. Then there's repairs. A good addition, they say. You can upgrade your pod by winning races and earning money for new bits like cooling systems and repair droids. If you're not doing so well, you can rummage in the scrapyard for old parts, but they might be unreliable, naturally. Finally, Closer Than Close is about camera angles. Loads of them apparently, including a rear view, and a first-person mode which feels really fast, like 600 miles per hour pace. They also mention a glance behind you view to see who's tailing you, handy that, and they reckon the corners come up so quickly you barely have time to react, so picking your pod is important. Oh, and there's a competition thing, a shipbuilding thing. It's Lego Star Wars, they're giving away some sets. You have to answer a question and send it in by June 20th to an address in Bath. The teaser question is, who plays Qui-Gon Jinn in Episode 1? Bit of a giveaway that one, isn't it? Liam Neeson, of course. Good luck to anyone who enters. This page shouts out about the big reviews in this issue, and right at the top it's got Joust and Defender, proper old-school arcade games by Eugene Jarvis, being reviewed. Apparently you can find the review on page 38, so not exactly front-page news, is it? Then there's 720 Degrees, another blast from the past Atari game this time, on the Game Boy Color. They're saying it's got bees, which sounds a bit bonkers but alright. Gee. The main image is all about Midway's arcade revival, with the word retro splashed across it. Makes you feel a bit old, doesn't it? They're talking about reliving your misspent youth, or discovering forgotten classics, which is a nice way of putting it. There are pictures of arcade cabinets and a Game Boy Color showing Defender on screen again, just to hammer home the retro arcade vibe. Down in the corner, there's a competition to win a brand new game if you send in your Game Boy camera pictures. Remember those? Grainy black and white snaps, brilliant. And then there's a section called Add-on Heaven, showing off some bits and bobs you could get for your Game Boy, probably from Japan, somewhere like Akihabara, if you were feeling flush and had a mate who could import stuff. Looks like issue 4, from June 1999, so smack bang in the middle of the summer. This page is the contents page for Planet Game Boy, issue 4 from June 1999, which takes me right back. Looking at the contents, it's promising a look at Game Boy add-ons, with a feature on shopping in Japan. Blimey, remember when that seemed so exotic and expensive? Then there's a reviews section promising retro arcade games, and a dodgy pinball sim. The preview boxes show Juiced/Defender, 720 Degrees, and Hollywood Pinball and Quest for Camelot. That's a bit of a mix. They're pushing it as a top buying guide, we'll see about that. Below that, there's a tips and scores section promising Game Boy secrets, probably just cheat codes and stuff, but back then that was gold dust. And lastly, Game Boy Gallery, Mutants Galore, and Jess Freaks, it says, which sounds a bit dodgy, probably some blurry black and white photos printed out on the Game Boy printer they're showing off. Remember that thing? A thermal printer, the photos faded in about a week. Over on the right there's a Welcome to Planet Game Boy bit from the editor, Martin Kitts. He's banging on about a takeover operation and bigger fish to fry. Bit dramatic for a Game Boy Mag intro, isn't it? He mentions they've got 8 pages this month, going on about handheld retro gaming, and reviews of 720 Degrees, Defender and Juiced. They're really pushing those retro titles. He also mentions tips for Zelda, probably Link's Awakening, or Oracle of Seasons/Ages if they're being really topical. And something about goodies you might like to pester your local importer for, which is a classic line from Mags at the time, suggesting all sorts of obscure bits and bobs. Oh, and he's hyping up Pocket Monsters Gold/Silver, European debut in October, which everyone was waiting for, and Mario Golf as well. Christ, they were really milking that Game Boy, weren't they? Good times. This page in N64 Magazine has got a couple of Game Boy reviews, proper retro stuff this time. First up, they've bundled Joust and Defender together, those old arcade classics. Defender? Blimey, that was a proper coin-op back in the day, wasn't it? Apparently, it's been nearly 20 years since it first appeared in the arcades. Makes you feel old, don't it? They're saying even now it's still a good shooter, frantic and tactical, and they mention rescuing those daft humans before they turn into mutants. They reckon the Game Boy controls are even better than the original arcade, which is a bonus. And you get Joust as well. Chicken jousting. Mental. They give it a solid 4 stars, saying it's excellent, but you might need a Game Boy Pocket to see those tiny graphics properly. Then, right underneath, there's a review for 720 Degrees. Another blast from the past, eh? Remember those 720 Degrees machines in the arcades? Madness. This one's about skateboarding and winning medals, going around these skate parks dotted around the town. You're doing stunts to earn tickets, and apparently, you gotta watch out for killer bees. Sounds a bit bonkers. They talk about slalom courses and downhill tracks, saying the downhill is all about speed, not stunts. Again, 4 stars for this one. Reckon it's a good bit of entertainment in short bursts. They even cheekily ask for an N64 version. Can you imagine 720 Degrees on the N64? That would be something. Both games getting 4 stars, not bad for a handheld then, eh? This page reviews 2 games for the Game Boy. First up is Quest for Camelot. Right, so they're keen to say it's not a Zelda clone, even though it looks a bit like Zelda and plays a bit like Zelda. It's based on that Warner Bros. Cartoon, Quest for Camelot, about some girl wanting to be a knight. Apparently nobody in the office knew the cartoon existed back then, which is fair enough. I can't say I remember it myself. They say it's a bit of a mixed bag, this game, bit basic and for younger gamers, or those who found Zelda a bit too taxing. They reckon expert gamers should give it a miss if they're used to proper games like The Ballad of the Windfish. Bit sarcastic there, I see. They've given it a 3 out of 5, which sounds about right for a game based on a cartoon tie-in back then. Sure. Then there's Hollywood Pinball. Pinball on the Game Boy. Always a decent shout when you're bored on the bus. They mention Kirby's Pinball Land, which was pretty good actually. This one's based on Hollywood movies, but they've had to change the names of the tables to avoid any trouble with the film studios. Apparently all 7 tables are pretty much the same basic design, which they find a bit boring. Not enough bonuses or hidden stuff to keep you interested for long. They did say the ball movement isn't too bad though, so that's something I suppose. This one gets a 2 out of 5, so probably one to avoid unless you're really desperate for a pinball fix on your Game Boy. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Game Boy add-ons from Japan, as you'd expect back then with all the cool stuff we missed out on. It starts by saying how great the Game Boy is because you can play games from any region, unlike other consoles, which was a big plus for importing. Tan the Jock. First up is Pokemon. Naturally, it was massive at the time. Apparently, it was the 3rd anniversary of the Pokemon Center in Tokyo, and they brought out special edition Game Boy Colors and Game Boy Pocket Lights. The yellow Game Boy Color was alright, but they reckon the Game Boy Pocket Light was the one to have. A luminous variety, whatever that means. Probably impossible to find in the UK. War. Then there's Pocket Pikachu, remember that thing? It was like a Tamagotchi but with Pikachu on it. You walked around with it, and it counted your steps, built up watts that you gave to Pikachu, made him like you more. All a bit daft really. It even did things like eat ice cream and have baths. Proper virtual pet stuff. They're being a bit dramatic, saying Nintendo might face a mental rampage if they're not careful. Next up is Super Game Boy 2. That let you play your Game Boy games on your SNES, or SNES as some called it. This one had a link port, but only in Japan it seems. Typical. Good for trading Pokemon on the telly I suppose. It was NTSC format, so you'd need the right telly or converter if you were importing. Worrying. Then there's GB Kiss, an infrared thing for the Game Boy Color. Never really saw the point of that myself. Apparently you could link it to your PC and download games. There were 29 games for it, only in Japan of course. Sounds like a lot of hassle for not much gain. And at the bottom there, Pocket Sonar. Believe it or not, it turns your Game Boy into a fish finder. Japanese anglers probably loved that. You stuck a sensor in the water, and it showed you where the fish were. They compare it to the Loch Ness movie, with Ted Danson. Random. This page then is all about tips, scores, and Zelda. Looks like they are giving away some secrets for Zelda. Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. Right at the top it warns you about spoilers, which is a bit of a laugh now, but back then if you were stuck on that trading sequence you'd be grateful for this. It walks you through getting the Yoshi doll all the way to the magnifying glass. Remember that trading lark? Started with something small and ended up with something useful, typical Nintendo puzzle box stuff. Chie. Then there's a section for high scores, proper old school this. Tetris DX and Marathon scores for the Game Boy. Blimey. Someone called Simon Parsons was really hammering Tetris in Bicester. And there's Game & Watch Gallery scores too. Donkey Kong, Parachute, Chef, Helmet, Vermin. Someone called Mike Taylor seems to be a bit of a Game & Watch king in Somerset. Good on him I guess. Bet they were chuffed to see their name in print. Finally there's a bit about Harvest Moon on the Game Boy, talking about easy money by selling mushrooms. They say don't make a habit of it though, cheeky. And a quick tip about the houseplant growing power berries. Yeah, classic stuff from back in the day, June 1999 according to the bottom, so must be N64 Magazine, when the Game Boy was still going strong alongside its big brother. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page then, is the Game Boy gallery from Planet Game Boy in N64 Magazine. It's a right laugh, looking back at these. It's all about user-submitted pictures taken with the Game Boy camera, remember that thing? They're calling them freaks and vile. Bit harsh really, but that was the humor back then. So there's a bunch of small photos dotted around, each with a little caption. We've got Jonathan Francie from Guildford, who apparently sent in a picture of his brother, and they joke about mistaking him for a pretty young lady. Then there's Michael Elderfield from Canterbury, who sent in 2 mutants for the price of 1, looks like some dodgy face swaps. Mark Kent from Pinner got called out for too much eyeliner, poor bloke. Someone called Peter Tweedy, they're wondering how he got to see whatever he's pictured in the first place. Cryptic that one. There's a mention of a notorious Luis Perez, wanted in 7 European countries, which is a bit dramatic for a Game Boy photo page. Ashley Jegg's mother gets a roasting, EWWW nasty they say. And Pedro Ariole from Portugal sent in his holiday snap, which they thought was much better. Samuel Krause's teacher, Mrs. Lim, apparently got snapped, swearing at the class, cheeky. Stephanie Keatley from Holland sent in a sweet picture for her friend, bless her. Thomas Walsh from Salford is responsible for some freak of the highest order, whatever that means. Scott Else sent in the first foot picture ever seen in this magazine. Bunyan-tastic they call it, haha. Daniel McFarlane apparently earned Jess's title as King of the Muties. Don't know what his picture is of but sounds grim. Andrea Scrafton sent a picture of her boyfriend Simon, and they reckon he should consider himself dumped based on it. William Davies did a comic with his Game Boy printer, good on him. And finally, Gigi Chewy from Inverness, They're not sure why she thought they'd be impressed. It takes all sorts, they say. Adele Tass from Sweden is featured for a censored nostril action. Nice ganger getting... What even is that? They're asking for more freaks to be sent into the Game Boy gallery at their Planet Game Boy address in Bath. And apparently, a spanking new game awaits the sender of the bestest. Right then. Good times, silly pictures on tiny screens. This page is having a right good look at Premier Manager on the N64, calling it a special investigation no less, and even sticking an exclusive badge on it, bless them. It's all about this football management game, and there's a screenshot of a match. Looks like Bristol Rovers are playing Blackpool. The article seems to be running through the game's bits and bobs, like player ratings, which are out of 99 apparently, and the team formation. They're showing off the pre-game squad screen, and the team rating, which is judged by stars. They also mention penalty points and yellow cards racking up, and there's a bit about game options, like match length and highlights. It seems like they are trying to be helpful, pointing out things like European opposition being a good test, and the different camera angles you can get, which was probably a big deal back then. All these ways to watch your pixelated lads kick a ball about. It's all pretty standard footy management stuff from the time, not exactly groundbreaking, but if you were into your N64 and fancied being a manager, this was probably your lot. This page is all about Premier Manager 64 coming to the Nintendo 64, which is a bit of a surprise as it's not really known for footy management games, is it? Seems N64 Magazine went up to Gremlin in Sheffield to have a play. They're saying it's the first ever playtest they've had, ever. They reckon it's stupefyingly Moorish, which sounds like they're hooked already. The reviewer is reminiscing about the old Amiga Premier Manager games, and how good Premier Manager 2 was back in the day, saying this N64 version keeps that feel. There's a couple of screenshots. One looks like you're watching a match between Bristol Rovers and Blackpool. In the League Cup, it's late in the game and Bristol Rovers are winning 10. You can see all the player names for both teams listed out. The other screenshot is just some match action from a slightly dodgy looking 3D perspective, very N64. Kablina. Apparently the appeal is that everyone fancies themselves as a football manager. Buying players, selling players, that sort of thing. They also mention the game has Sky Sports style goal replays, which was quite swanky for the time. It's due out in July in the UK, and autumn for you lucky folks over in the States. And there's a picture of some bloke in Adidas gear looking very serious. Maybe he's meant to be a manager or something. This page is a look into Premier Manager 64, a footy management game for the N64. They're chatting to one of the developers about it. It sounds like they were pretty chuffed to be bringing a management game to the N64, and one of the things they were keen on was making it faster and easier to use than other versions, probably a dig at the PlayStation ones. They've even used the Actua Soccer 3 engine for the match highlights, which is a bit of alright, making the matches look better on the N64. It goes on to talk about the nitty-gritty of managing your club, like sorting out sponsors. You can choose your hoardings and team sponsors, which brings in the cash. Vital for signing new players, obviously. Then there's the transfer market, which they say is where it all happens. You can find some bargains if you're canny, especially in the lower leagues, as you won't be affording any Zidans, although they joke about trying to sign him for 15 million, or maybe snapping up Ken Charley on a free. Now that's proper bargain hunting. It mentions all the finances you've got to juggle. Player wages, ground improvements, gate receipts, ticket prices, all that jazz to make sure you're not bankrupting your club before Christmas. And if you need a top scorer, they reckon the top scorers list is the place to look. But it's not just a case of buying anyone, you've got to tempt them with the right deal. Sounds like they've put a decent amount of depth into it for a console management game. This page is about Premier Manager 64 on the N64, looks like a preview. It's got a couple of articles, one called Cream Team and another called The Big Match. Cream Team seems to be about getting your team ready. They're talking about pre-season training, getting players fit after their summer holidays in Tenerife. Cheeky. Looks like you need to sort out your squad, decide who to keep and sell. Then it mentions formations and tactics, saying PM64 is diverse and has tons of options. They also mention scouting just before a big game, to check out the opposition's tactics and danger men. Yeah, sounds like standard footy manager stuff, gotta get your team in shape, tactics right, bit of scouting, all that jazz. The big match bit is talking about how good the match highlights are in PM64, using the Actua Soccer 3 engine. They say it's a step up, and the expansion pack lets you see it all in hires. Apparently the commentary had to be chopped down to fit on the cartridge, but they reckon it's still good. They also mention Kevin Keegan being involved, giving his opinion on formations and players. Sounds like they're trying to make it a proper realistic footy manager game, which is what you'd hope for really. There are screenshots showing the game. You can see training screens, squad formation, league tables, and match action. It's all very colourful, and looks pretty decent for the N64. They even mention a golden age mode where players age and retire. which is a nice touch for realism. Apparently switch on PM64 mode to see it. All in all, it seems like they're quite impressed with Premier Manager 64, reckons it's bringing the footy manager experience to the N64, which is fair enough. It's not bad looking for a cartridge-based footy manager game, is it? Might be alright for a bit of a kickabout, digitally speaking of course. This page is from an old N64 mag, like back in '99. It's all about E3, that massive game show in Los Angeles, which was always a bit of a trek back then. Apparently it was the biggest and loudest video game show. Which, yeah, it probably was. This article is an N64 special investigation, dramatic stuff, calling it last, probably meaning last look at the games before they come out or something. The article is about the sheer scale of E3, saying it's like a massive conference hall with loads of N64 games. They're name-dropping a few games that were on show, like Resident Evil, Grand Theft Auto, Turok 3 and Shadow Man. Big titles at the time, mind you. Sengya. Then it moves on to Perfect Dark, which is no surprise really, it was the game everyone was waiting for. They're saying it's probably the biggest game ever for the N64, which is a bold claim. They compare it a lot to GoldenEye, which is obvious as it's from Rare as well. They talk about the weapons and the gameplay being similar to GoldenEye, the sneaky tactics, and the headshots. They even mention a rapid-fire pistol that kills all known germs dead. Bit over the top. In it? They're saying E3 Feed 99 is the first time you could actually play Perfect Dark outside of Rare, which is a big deal. They reckon by the end of the year, everyone will have an opinion on whether it lives up to the hype. The reviewer liked the fact that it was still in development, but the aiming was already decent. Sounds like they were pretty impressed, but trying not to get too carried away, you know how it is. This page is delving into the murky depths of behind closed doors development, specifically for Turok 3. They're making out it could be 2 games in one, a proper sequel and something else entirely, which is a bit of a head-scratcher. The magazine seems to be wondering whether the multiplayer in Turok 3 will be a deathmatch like Turok 2, or if they'll try and nick some ideas from GoldenEye's fantastic multiplayer. Perfect Dark gets a mention too, being pitched as a rival to Turok, which was always going to be the case, wasn't it? 2 big shooters battling it out. There's a moody screenshot from Turok 3 and another one of Joanna Dark looking a bit glum, with a funny caption underneath joking she'll cheer up if Perfect Dark sells millions. They also mention something about N64 readers and Perfect Day, sounding like they had some sort of playtest event, and people were chuffed about being able to plant mines in games. All in all, your typical preview hype piece from June '99 when we were all gagging for these big N64 games to finally come out. This page is all about upcoming N64 games. Looks like the magazine's doing a special investigation. First up is Shadow Man, which they're clearly quite chuffed about. Sounds like a dark and gruesome Zelda-like game. Proper grown-up stuff for the N64, which was a bit rare back then. They're going on about voodoo and scary bits, which is always good for a laugh, and apparently it's massive, 7,080 hours long. Crikey. Then there's a bit on Resident Evil, under Behind Closed Doors. Seems they're doing a prequel on the N64, not just a port of Resident Evil 2, which is a bit of a surprise. They're talking about using the RE2 engine but building a new 3D world around it, set before the other games. Sounds interesting if it actually happens. Capcom weren't always the most reliable on the N64, were they? Down below they've got playable, plastered all over the place. Donkey Kong 64 finally confirmed playable after Rare were being all secretive about it. Big news at the time, everyone was waiting for a proper 3D Donkey Kong. 12 Tales, Conker 64 is there too, another Rare game. Remember Mr. Eyeballs? That Conker game looked quite something even then, and they're talking about 4-player deathmatch, which sounds like it could be a laugh. Star Wars Episode 1, Racer is in there as well. Pod racing game, naturally, seemed like every game had to be a pod racer back then. Lightning quick racing in pods. They say, well yeah, it's pod racing. And finally, Jet Force Gemini, another Rare one. This one had been in the works for ages. Felt like we'd been waiting years for it. Apparently it's going to be violent but cuddly, whatever that means. Goo flying everywhere when you shoot enemies, that kind of thing. Sounds alright, though Rare games were always a bit hit and miss, weren't they? Still, good times. This page then is a right old N64 special investigation. First up, Grand Theft Auto 64, finally. Sounds like after ages DMA Design got the nod to make it. They mention all the fruity language and dodgy dealings were a sticking point with Nintendo. Using the Silicon Valley engine apparently, and it's already half finished and heading to E3. They're saying because of games like Resident Evil and Turok being on the console, Nintendo couldn't really complain about GTA. Then there's Metroid 64 under Dream On. Always a bit of a pipe dream that, isn't it? Just wondering when we might actually see it. Earthbound 64, or Mother 3 as they call it in Japan, They've dusted off an old screenshot. Apparently it disappeared with the 64DD, that thing that hardly anyone bought. Maybe, just maybe, it'll appear. Mission Impossible 2 is in there. Likely apparently. Engines ready, adventure game, Outcast mentioned. Vikade. Still a bit mysterious. Eternal Darkness is playable. Nintendo surprised this one. Silicon Knights are doing it. A mix of Zelda and Resident Evil it seems. Fixed camera angles and jump scares apparently. Rika is playable too. Zelda-ish sci-fi adventure. Bit Studios are on it. Bit of a Metroid vibe. They reckon we might see a playable version of Rika at E3 as well. Ridge Racer 64, well I never thought Namco had given up on the N64. They say it won't be just a straight rip-off of the PlayStation Ridge Racer games, which is probably a good thing. And lastly, Mini Racers, a super secret racing game by Intermetrics, apparently linked to Rare. Gran Turismo beta they're asking. Pull the other one. June 1999 issue, page 51. This page, Ruka Iikwa. It's one of those N64 Arena mag pages, brings you back, doesn't it? So it's a review page, as you'd expect. Looks like they're giving Mystical Ninja 2, starring Goemon the once-over. Goemon, yeah, that was a bit of a weird one, wasn't it? They say his second adventure is taking a turn for the 2D, in their massive PAL review. Bit dramatic, lads. There's a screenshot of the game there, classic N64 3D, all polygons and charm or something. Tehi. Then there's the breakdown of how they score games. Apparently, because N64 carts were so expensive, they only give out their Star Game Award when it's proper good, you know, value for money. They even gave away a $5 off at gameplay with the Star Game badge. Fancy? They go through the categories too: visuals, sounds, mastery, which I guess is gameplay, and lifespan, how long it'll keep you going, and then the verdict obviously. Scores over 85% get the star. Right, well, seems pretty standard review stuff for the time really. This page from N64 Magazine, right? It's a bit of a mishmash as always. Up top we've got Loadrunner 3D, another one trying to bring an old classic into the 3D world. Seems they're giving it a whirl for the PAL region. Then there's the Import Arena section, showing off Pokemon Snap. That Photo Safari game seemed a bit strange at the time, but I guess it was popular in Japan first. The big chunk is budget reviews, Nintendo trying to give us cheap thrills. F1 World Grand Prix, apparently the bee's knees for F1 games on console. Snowboard Kids, yeah, that was basically Mario Kart on snowboards. Probably a laugh. Lilac Wars, or Lilac Wars as some people call it, getting a budget release. That space shooter with animals, decent game that. Wave Race 64, they're still banging on about that, it was alright, wet in it. And Mario Kart 64, claiming it's the best multiplayer ever. Bit strong maybe, but it was good fun down the pub. Ikishi. Then they've got Rampage Universal Tour, another Rampage game. Those were always a bit mindless fun, weren't they? And Triple Play 2000, baseball, probably not setting the world on fire. Down at the bottom is Team 64, this was their little skit section, bit daft really. Looks like they're pretending to have some kind of bizarre reactions to playing these games. Tim Weaver got lard on him playing Snowboard Kids. Justin Webb turned into the Joker playing Lilac Wars. Bit over the top. Martin Kitts had some cleaning staff mysteriously vanish after Wave Race spooky. Will Overton's hair exploded blue playing Pokemon. Classic. Jess Bickham got chucked in the river for Goemon 2. Paul Edwards sprouted blue spikes and lard with Triple Play. Andrea Ball was sicked out by Mario Kart baboons. And old Pete Travers, bless him, needs fresh air and a walking stick after Rampage. Bit of nonsense to fill the page really, but there you go, June 1999. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 29 it is, has a feature on Mystical starring Goemon 2. Right then, Goemon? Konami, eh? They're going off the boil according to the mag, bit harsh maybe? They're saying Konami is squandering the blue-haired fella's lucky charm. Beshi charm. So Goemon 2 gets a bit of a ribbing for taking a step back from 3D, apparently the first one, Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, which got a decent score of 90% in issue 14, was a bit bonkers with its camera and controls but ambitious and colourful. This new one though, they reckon it's gone back to being a 2D platformer. They compare it to Mario 64 with RPG bits but say this one's more a 2D platformer, like Yoshi's Story or Mischief Makers. Which aren't bad games mind you. They just think Goemon 2 should be more than that. They mention turning Yae into a mermaid, which sounds a bit daft but also kind of fun at the same time. Typical Japanese game really. There are screenshots, you've got Goemon himself, blue hair as promised, looking a bit cheeky. There's a grumpy looking gatekeeper saying you need passes, and another bit showing Goemon in a town scene. The article mentions fighting Godzilla-sized robots, which sounds right up my street, and exploring castles and medieval cities. At the bottom there's a little box for Goemon 2 by Konami, says it's out now, 128 megabytes, controller pack and rumble pack compatible, and costing £40, typical N64 pricing. Yeah, 40 quid was a fair whack back then for a game. Still, Goemon games were always a bit different, weren't they? A bit of Japanese madness. The next page in this N64 mag is having a look at Ninja Goemon 2, or Mystical Ninja 2, starring Goemon as it's properly called, I suppose. It's got a big feature on the first boss, called the Bare Bones. Looks like a massive skeleton hanging over a rickety bridge, very dramatic for a first boss, I'll give it that, even if they reckon it's easy to beat. The screenshots show this skeleton dude breathing fire, which you apparently need to avoid by hiding in a corner. Standard boss tactics really, wait for the attack, then smack it when it's tired. They say to leap up and smite the vile thing with the business end of your weapon, a bit dramatic, isn't it? They also mention the changing rooms feature, where you can swap between characters. Apparently Goemon has 3 mates, Ebisumaru, who they call Fat and Blue, Sasuke, a ponytailed robot, and Yae, who is green-haired. Sounds like a typical wacky Japanese game cast. They say you start with Goemon or Ebisumaru, and find Yae and Sasuke later. And apparently there's even an extra-dimensional tea room where you can swap characters. Bit bonkers, but that's Goemon for you. The review itself sounds a bit lukewarm. They call it unremarkably middle off the road, and say it's got an outmoded style and lack of invention compared to the first Mystical Ninja game. Ouch. The big problem apparently is backtracking and mini-quests to get entry passes to progress. They also moan about the day-to-night system being pointless and just imposing a time limit for collecting objects. Doesn't sound amazing, to be honest, but maybe it's got some charm. They reckon there's not much drama in this sequel either, but at least you can swap between the characters and use their different abilities. Sounds like they're not exactly rushing out to buy it, put it that way. This page from the mag is having a look at some bits in Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the N64. It talks about a mini-quest where you're rummaging around in an old bloke's house in Loston Town. Apparently he's on about something nasty down his well and wants you to sort it out. Down the well you find this iguana man who's not happy at all, just wants to be left alone. If you respect his wishes and leave him be, he gives you an entry pass, nice one. Crombled. Then there's a section called Quest Action, about another quest, where you have to find 3 items for this Hyper DJ character in Loston Town to complete a subquest. Seems you need to get headphones, a mic, and a record for him. The first thing, the headphones, is just a case of navigating some swinging poles. The mic needs a boulder moving and a bit of jumping. And the record is guarded by a mini-boss with a bazooka, but apparently, he's not too tough. Once you get all the bits, the DJ gives you an entry pass, which you need 5 of, to get into the city. It mentions that these levels are a bit on rails, and whilst there are different routes, they're mostly just to make things a bit harder, with collectibles hidden away. Lastly, there's a bit called Disturbing Behavior, about getting Goemon's chain pipe in Goemon 2. Apparently you have to go through a sequence where Goemon looks like he's dressed as a young lady in Loston Town. The reviewer seems a bit taken aback by it, calling it very worrying indeed. It shows some screenshots of a lady asking Goemon for a favor, wanting some money, and eventually needing 100 coins, which you have to hand over. Bless you indeed. This page is a review of Goemon's Great Adventure on the N64, which they're calling Goemon 2 for some reason. It's set in 2D, which is a bit of a surprise after Mystical Ninja on the 64, and they mention Mr. Ely Fant and the cat doll things are back, but in 2D now. Apparently these cat dolls power up your weapon, and Goemon's pipe becomes silver, then gold and longer, which they say is always nice cheeky sods. They reckon the graphics are alright, pleasant and evocative, but not mind-blowing. Sounds are good too, toe-tapping tunes and excitable Japanese howls and yaps. Mastery is a 5 out of 10, saying it's a 2D platformer, so not exactly rocket science. Lifespan is a 6, could be longer but the 2-player mode is decent. The verdict is a 69%, which is, well, average then. They say it's a solid 2D platformer, but lacks the innovation of the 3D Mystical Ninja game. Bit harsh maybe, but that's magazines for you, Jaya. There are some screenshots dotted about, showing the game in action. Looks colourful enough, bit like the old SNES games but shinier. One picture mentions robotic ninja Sasuke with firecracker bombs, and another one says, "Hurrah! It's Goemon Impact," smiling a rather disturbing smile. Cute little nose, mind. There's also something about a mini-boss you have to beat to bring Impact back to his senses. Sounds typically bonkers Goemon stuff, to be honest. Cheshul. Looks like they had a bit of a laugh with some of the other screenshots. One says, "Oh good, now she can afford to go to the beauty salon," about a character. And another one says, "And she needs it, as she is actually a stubbly he. Yoicks. Bit cheeky." Another one says, "But it's okay, as you've now got the chain pipe. Hurrah!" Chain pipe, eh? Gomon games, always a bit weird. This page reviewing Lode Runner 3D, eh? Right, blast from the past that is. Lode Runner, Commodore 64, those were the days. This article is going on about how it's back, but in 3D now, and thankfully without the dodgy 80s fashion sense. The reviewer is saying the game is all about nicking gold and dodging the baddies, monk chaps I think they are, in these compact levels. Apparently you get a laser gun to blast blocks, which sounds a bit more exciting than the old one. They mention bombs later on and hooded creatures, getting a bit carried away perhaps. Camera system sounds a bit fancy for a Lode Runner game, but they're saying it's like Mario, so maybe not too bad. No, visually they reckon it's alright. Not too shabby, but not amazing either. Sounds are okay, few nice effects, but the music gets on your nerves after a while. Mastery score is a 4, saying graphics are only a bit better than on the Commodore 64, bit harsh maybe. Lifespan is a 7, saying it's challenging but gets samey eventually. Verdict is a 70%, captivating in bursts, well thought out, but a bit outdated. Fair enough, sounds about right for a retro update, doesn't set the world on fire, but might be a bit of fun for a while. They even highlighted a tricky dicky level, sounds like a proper pain, with moving discs and monks getting in the way. One of the screenshots is even asking, "How are you going to get out of here?" So it must be a proper head scratcher. They also mentioned it's out on the 21st of May, for £40, 64 meg cart, rumble pack thingy, all the usual bits for the N64. Jes Bickham wrote it, must be one of their regulars. Yeah, Lode Runner 3D, might give it a go if there's nothing else on, looks like a decent enough puzzle game. This page is a look back at Mario Kart 64, framed as part of the Player's Choice selection, which back then was Nintendo trying to shift some of their older but still brilliant games at a cheaper price, about 30 quid they reckon, half price compared to new games at the time. They're saying it's still absolutely top tier even a couple of years after its original release, especially for multiplayer. The review bangs on about how perfectly balanced it is, even with the chaotic power-ups like lightning and blue shells, reckons it just makes it exciting right to the end. They do admit some people might moan about the power-up system being a bit unfair, but they are having none of that. Visually they say it's more than just functional, and most of the tracks are design masterpieces. Apart from one they apparently refuse to play sounds ominous. They list some great tracks like Rainbow Road, Mario Circuit, Banshee Boardwalk, Wario Stadium, Cooper Beach, and Royal Raceway proper classics those are. Rainbow Road gets a little dig for being a poor track though, which is a bit harsh. It's iconic, if a bit unforgiving. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing the game in action, like a race on what looks like a jungle track, and the character select screen. One mentions nobody managing a jump start and another about the infinite turbo mushroom, which is handy. There's a bit in a speech bubble that says, "You'll only ever choose your one favorite racer." True that, everyone had their go-to driver, didn't they? In the What We Said box from their original review, they said it ought to last a lifetime, and was extremely entertaining. The verdict section calls it, arguably the best multiplayer game ever made, and gives it a top score of 5 out of 5. Strong words, but back then it felt pretty spot on, didn't it? They even take a swipe at anyone who thought the Super Nintendo SNES version was better, telling them to expect laughter. Bit cheeky, but that's magazine reviews for you. This page in N64 Magazine takes me right back. First up, we have a look at Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 Feet, as our American cousins call it. It's bigged up as the sequel to the SNES shoot-'em-up, and they were right, it was quite something back then with all the speech and cutscenes, making it feel like an interactive movie. They mention the branching paths and the bosses, which were pretty epic, even if they were polygons that look a bit chunky now. It was Nintendo's first proper PAL conversion too, which was a step up at the time apparently. They dock a point for pop-up graphics, and no rumble pack, which seems a bit harsh given it got a 5 out of 5. The reviewer reckons it's got everything you want in a good movie but in a game, calling it brilliant. High praise indeed. Then we've got Snowboard Kids. Mario Kart on Ice is how they described it, and yeah, pretty spot on. It was a bit different from your usual kart racer, with snowboards and all that. They say it tries to be a bit different from Mario Kart, and it kind of was. Mention of unusual surfaces and cartoon graphics, power-ups, multiplayer. They reckon the power-ups are good fun and it's great for multiplayer. They give it a solid 4 out of 5, saying the sequel is better, but the original is still charming and playable. Fair enough. This page in N64 Magazine writes, so it's having a look at Wave Race and F1 World Grand Prix. Wave Race, blimey, what a game that was back then. They reckon no other game since has really captured racing on water like it. Even them 1080 and F-Zero Xi games. It was one of the first N64 titles to tide us over until Mario Kart arrived. Apparently the controls are proper subtle, letting you do 360 spins and bank into turns and all that. You could even surf over waves for a boost. Cheeky. They mentioned polygon riders and the PAL conversion being a bit pants compared to the NTSC one, slower and bigger borders apparently. Still, they reckon the water effects were top notch. There's a screen grab of some geezer doing a stunt says, "Look at that fat boy go," about one of the racers, Dave Mariner. They've given it 5 out of 5 and reckon it's essential for racing fans, comparing it to Super Mario 64 no less. Bit strong maybe. Ooh. Then there's F1 World Grand Prix, another player's choice title. Apparently it was a full-price game not long back, and it was a hit. They say it's better than PC F1 Sims, and superior to Psygnosis's F1 from '98, strong words. Tracks are recognizable from the telly, Monaco's the benchmark, in it. They're banging on about no pop-up or fogging, proper colors, and a rumble pack. You can switch to in-car view and feel bumps apparently. They reckon it's hard but the computer helps you out with gears and braking. You can even have random weather. Screenshot of a race car there looks like the German Grand Prix. They mentioned Ubisoft tried to steal its thunder with Monaco Grand Prix, but failed to match it. Again they've given this one 5 out of 5, calling it mind-blowing and the preeminent N64 driving game, until the sequel turns up anyways. Seems like they were rather impressed with both races then. This page is all about import games, something we were quite used to back in the day. It's an import arena section, and this time it's focusing on Pokemon. Specifically, it's previewing Pokemon Snap for the N64, which was getting everyone a bit excited at the time, especially since it was a bit different to the usual Pokemon games. They're showing off some screenshots from Pokemon Snap, like a Grimer doing its thing and some Execute looking rather lost, and there's a shot of Ash. Or at least, the N64's blocky version of Ash, looking through what I suppose is his camera in the game. The reviewer seems to think it's a bit like a Jurassic Park sort of thing, snapping photos of Pokemon in their natural habitats, which sounds alright if you were into that kind of thing. There's also a mention of a Charizard hovering over water, which they point out is a bit risky for a fire Pokemon, a bit of common sense there, eh? And they describe a Chansey as a pink marshmallow-like thing, which is a fair enough description I suppose, and mention its egg. The text mentions that these games are only out in Japan or America at the moment, hence the import bit, and they'll bring a review once it's released in the UK. So yeah, just a little look at Pokemon Snap and the world of Pokemon through the lens of the N64, literally. It was a different sort of Pokemon game to what we were used to, that's for sure. This page is all about Pokemon Snap, looks like a preview or early review from back in the day. It's got a section called Tools of the Trade, going over the bits and bobs you use in the game. They're talking about apples to bait Pokemon, balls that turn them into jelly, speed boosts, and a flute to get their attention, all to help you get better photos apparently. There are a few screenshots of the game, one with a Pidgey, another with a Meowth pulling a face, and a Magikarp flapping about. The captions are a bit cheesy, calling Meowth funky and saying you gotta snap 'em all. Bit cringe, even back then. There's a bit about Doctor in the House mentioning Dr. Okido, who we know as Professor Oak, comparing your photos. Sounds a bit like hard work trying to impress him. Down at the bottom there's a little info box saying Pokemon Snap is out now in the US, and coming to the UK in October. Crikey, that feels like ages away back then. They're banging on about it being the world's first Kodak 'em up, which is a bit of a naff tagline if you ask me. Mentions of Tamagotchi, Furbies, and yo-yos too, trying to lump it all in with that craze for little gadgets. Seems they reckon it'll have real challenge in snapping all the monsters, but they also think interest might wane quickly. Bit of a mixed message then, eh? Still, Pokemon was massive, so you just knew everyone would be picking this up when it finally landed over here. This page is about Pokemon Snap on the N64, in a section called Import Arena. It talks about how the game is all about taking photos of Pokemon in their natural habitat on Pokemon Island for Dr. Okido. You know, Professor Oak but Japanese. It mentions you get points for good snaps, based on how close and centered they are, and how many Pokemon you get in the shot. They reckon it's a bit of a laugh recreating a wildlife park but digitally, and compares it to Pilot Wing's photography missions, saying don't expect it to be the same. They describe the buggy you drive around in as a bit basic and hard to control, wobbling all over the place. There are a few screenshots, one of a Snorlax asleep, another of a Charmander being a bit cheeky, and one of a Squirtle looking a bit glum. There's also a funny caption about a Mankey being ugly and another about a Lickitung, giving you a licking. It ends by saying that all 150 Pokemon in the game have their own personalities and moves taken from the Game Boy games, and it's hard not to pick a favorite. Sounds like they thought it was a decent bit of fun for the N64 back then. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99 is all about Pokemon Snap, right in the import section. They're talking about this extra quest in the game where you've got to find 6 hidden Pokemon that are disguised as bits of scenery. Classic Professor Oak. Apparently once you've done the main game, he sets you this task, and if you manage it, you get a bonus level with a really special Pokemon. They reckon proper Pokemon fans will know who it is, making it sound like it's some ultra-rare monster. Visually they're giving it an 8 out of 10, saying it's fast, colourful and smooth. Which, yeah, N64 games often were at the time. Sound gets a 7, apparently nice tunes, and Pokemon cries, can't argue with that. Mastery's only a 6, suggesting it's not exactly brain surgery to play, probably a bit of a casual game really, not like Zelda or Turok in terms of challenge. Lifespan gets an 8, saying it's addictive, but you might lose interest quick if you snap them all. The review itself describes the game world as like a real-life wildlife park, with volcanoes and waterfalls, which is fair enough, it was quite impressive for the time. They mention being on rails in a buggy, being a bit of a letdown, as the landscapes are nice, but they say you can concentrate on chucking fruit and taking photos, which is the whole point I suppose. They compare it to Parappa the Rapper or Buster Groove on the PlayStation, saying it's a novelty game rather than a proper long-lasting epic but still fun. Verdict is 80%, saying it's innovative and brilliant fun, even if it is short-lived. So overall, sounds like a decent enough distraction if you were a Pokemon fan and had finished everything else. This page in N64 Magazine, well, it's a right old panning of Rampage 2, Universal Tour. Remember Rampage? Smashing buildings as giant monsters? Yeah, this is that, but apparently not good. They're calling it a tired old steamer of a game right there on the page, which doesn't sound promising, does it? Looking at the review box, it's from Midway, out now in the UK and US, and it's a hefty 96 megabytes, needs a controller pack, and will set you back about 40 quid, a fair bit back then. Says 13 players, so at least you could bring your mates along for the misery. They've got these little speech bubbles next to screenshots like, that rat thing is a contender for worst ever character, charming. And look, it's a big lobster monster. Ha ha ha. It's brilliant. Ha. Sound of gunfire. Very sarcastic. They've broken it down into categories. Visuals are hateful characters and basic animation. Sounds are unlistenable outtakes from California Speed, which I guess is another Midway game. Not a good sign. Mastery is nasty business, and lifespan is about 10 minutes. Ouch. The main review text goes on about how it's an unnecessary sequel to an already dated game, a waste of time and money. They reckon Midway must have been a bit mad to make it. Apparently it's the same game as the original, but worse graphics, and they're comparing the monster designs unfavorably to Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. Bit harsh comparing a 3D game to a SNES classic, but you get their point, it sounds rough. Saya. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, reckons it's rubbish, not quite as bad as the truly unplayable stuff like Mortal Kombat Mythologies, but still rubbish. He says to run like hell if you see it coming, and gives it a score of 22%. Blimey, that's low. Looks like Rampage 2 is one to avoid then. Best stick with the memories of the original in the arcade, eh? This page then, it's an import review from N64 Magazine, June '99 issue, taking a look at Triple Play 2000 on the N64. Blimey, remember that? Seems like they'd just been playing Acclaim's All-Star Baseball 2000 and were a bit underwhelmed by this EA effort afterwards. The review kicks off with the writer suggesting they should have played Triple Play first to lower their expectations, as they'd been spoiled by the Acclaim baseball game. Ouch. Apparently, Triple Play 2000 is a bit of a letdown, feeling stodgy and unappetizing compared to the competition. They're saying it's struggling to decide if it's arcadey or a proper sim, ending up not really hitting the mark either way. The menus are apparently bewildering, throwing loads of options at you. Gameplay-wise, they mention it's easy to just throw the ball, hit the ball, and then yawn. Sounds riveting, eh? There's a screenshot of a batter looking like he's just smashed one out of the park, another of a pitcher winding up, and another showing the field from a distance, all very standard baseball fare. They do mention this arrow mate system, which is supposed to help you catch the ball, basically showing you where to move your fielder. Sounds a bit hand-holdy, even for back then. They even joke about the players moving like your granddad, which is a bit harsh but probably fair enough if the animation was clunky. PT. The review breaks down the game into visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan. Visuals are apparently jerky and the players look a bit stiff. Sounds are repetitive commentary and crisp packet crumpling crowd noises, charming. Mastery is apparently simple like a SNES game, which isn't necessarily a compliment. Lifespan is short because single player is dull and multiplayer options are limited. Lul Tray. The verdict is pretty damning, giving it a 50% score. They reckon it fails because of its simplicity and lack of polish, even if American sports sims can be a bit overcomplicated. Ouch. Double ouch. Sounds like Triple Play 2000 was a bit of a swing and a miss then, eh? This page from Club 64, right? It's the section from the magazine dedicated to N64 owners. Blimey, look at that Duke Nukem. 0 Hour is the main game they're covering this month. The world's first guide, they reckon. Grab a gun, some attitude, and a joypad, they say. Cheeky. Looks like they've got some tips and a walkthrough for it. Worry. Then there's the usual bits and bobs. Club 64 mailbox for readers' letters, naturally. How to. Something or other. Always a bit vague, these magazine sections. Help wanted. For Rogue Squadron power-ups, everyone needed a hand with those games back then, didn't they? Tips extra. For more general cheats and tips. Can't have too many of those. Oh, and Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, blimey. A doctor in the house? And he's a bit of a psycho. Bit much, isn't it? Nintendo Hotline for Zelda info and readers' questions. Game On for new N64 releases. I'm the Best for leagues and hard games. And Skill Club, which is probably more of the same. Then the standard contact and directory bits, and back issues and subscriptions at the back, because of course, they've also got a bit about racing simulation Monaco Grand Prix, calling it a brilliant new N64 challenge, and Castlevania, saying it's super hard, and bits will be crushed until they squeal. Dramatic bunch. Yep, typical magazine spread back in the day, bit of everything for the N64 gamer. This page from Club 64, the mailbox section, looks like a right chuckle. We've got readers writing in about their N64 thoughts. Key, first up, there's a star letter called Mystery, about Zelda. Ocarina of Time. Someone noticed that on the back of the box, in a screenshot, young Link is holding items he shouldn't be able to use until he's older Link, like the hookshot and fairy bow. Bit of an early version cock-up on the box art, perhaps, like they did with GoldenEye, apparently. Warrington. Then there's Weird, where a reader suggests a Zelda TV show idea, a bit bonkers but fun. They also suggest ideas for a Zelda sequel, reckon there should be more monsters, and the day and night cycle should change quicker in the game. Sounds like they want to see more action and less waiting around in Hyrule. Cold Custard is a funny one. A lad played Zelda for 24 hours with his feet in cold custard for comic relief. That's dedication, or madness, maybe both. They even managed to raise over 80 quid. Apparently this magazine only gave Zelda a 60% in a review, which the writer of this letter is not happy about and wants to have words with the reviewer. Bit harsh on the reviewer, maybe they had a bad day? Someone else wrote in under rubbish, moaning about sexism in the Zelda TV advert. Bit sensitive if you ask me, but each to their own. Finally, there's a correction corner sorting out some goofs from previous issues. Apparently, San Francisco Rush and Rogue Squadron saved to the cartridge, not the controller pack. They also got Wave Race and YRA Country Club Golf mixed up in the directory. And there was a mix-up between Shrubs and Scrubs in the Nintendo Hotline section. Classic. Always a few mistakes sneaking in, got to keep the editors on their toes. This page of Club 64 mailbox, right? It's all letters from readers, bit of reader reviews and that. There's a section called Jumble Sale, where someone's found a Zelda adventure book called The Shadow Prince. They're going on about how the Ganon on the front looks a bit rubbish, like he's just come from his office job. Always a laugh when they take the Mickey out of Ganon, isn't it? Then there's a letter from a bloke called John Copping moaning that GoldenEye took him 5 months to complete. Honestly, 5 months, some people. He's asking if anyone took longer. I bet some did. Those last bits were proper hard, weren't they? Then there's a letter from a bloke. Someone else writes in about being stuck on Queen Goma in Zelda, and they found a Zelda guide in Winsford Library, proper library research there. The index number was 794.8. They even ask Ed to remind them of the number again, bless. Lastly, there's a perfect day section. Ideas for a perfect day game, like proper spy game ideas. Planting mines, using garrots and grappling hooks, all that good stuff. Someone wants guards to have different personalities, and even sniffer dogs and create a player mode. Another idea is drugging guards with sleeping pills. Bit dark that. And someone else wants to use a dead person as a human shield. Bit much, innit? Still, good ideas for a spy game, I suppose. This page from N64 Magazine, you've got your usual reader letters kicking things off in Mailbox Club. Someone reckons Zelda is better than Robocop vs Terminator, which is fighting talk, innit? They're even giving the Mega Drive version a shout-out. Then there's a bit about RCP-90s, must be GoldenEye still being a talking point. Over on the right, there's a piece titled Modem, and they're wondering about an N64 modem. Can you imagine dial-up on the N64? They mentioned 2-hour Mario Party sessions, costing 12 quid. Sounds a bit steep even then. They're rattling off a list of games they reckon would be good online, like Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong, Resident Evil, Star Wars, GTA, Turok 3. Terrier. Ambitious stuff for the N64 really. Terry. Next up is Dinosaurs, which is about someone spotting a Nazi dinosaurs game in a Justice League comic, apparently on a console dubbed Playtendo. Bit cheeky that. Editor's got a good line about Nintendo's legal SWAT team kicking doors in. Proper wind-up merchant. Pyre. Then there's, so tell me this, the Q&A bit. Someone's asking about a Zelda sequel and gold carts. Always wanting more Zelda, weren't we? Another one's on about SimCity 2000, remember that being touted for ages. Shadow Man 2 and Rollercoaster Tycoon are mentioned, and Turok 2's Armorines. Seems like they're changing things up in that game. There's a funny question about remembering the Vectrex and Atari 7800, making some of us feel ancient, and a bit of banter about whether Jess from the mag has always been bald. All in all, a typical snapshot of N64 Magazine back then, full of reader questions, rumours, and a bit of a laugh. This page of N64 Magazine is doing a quiz. Standard stuff for mags back then, 50 quid for the winner, not bad. They reckon it's dead easy. Easier than popping to Tesco on a Saturday, which is a bit cheeky. Questions are typical game mag fodder. Who played Obi-Wan Kenobi in the new Star Wars film? Pokemon Snap being the second Pokemon game. A Duke Nukem level setting. Dr. Kit's medical qualifications. Which game is based on a PC Army Men title this month? How many Castlevania games were on the SNES? 3 rare games coming in '99. Highest Planet Game Boy score. What E3 stands for. And where the multiplayer challenge final is being held. Bit of a mixed bag. Some easy, some you'd have to think about. P. Then there's the N64 board, which is basically the reader's art page. Someone's drawn a hybrid alien, calling it Heaven. Bit weird. There's a 4-player Frenzy drawing with some mates playing games. Typical multiplayer sesh vibe. Looks like Mario Kart style characters. Someone called Michael Green has drawn Link. Looking a bit glum, to be honest. Jen has done an evil looking sketch, whatever that is. A bit generic monstery looking. And Reno Summer sent in a Turok 2 sketch. It's alright, I suppose. Elsbeth Leafers reckons the board has wit, artistic talent, and sicko humour. Bit much, isn't it? Right at the bottom, there's the usual how to enter spiel. Send your answers to the magazine address in Bath. Closing date, the 20th of June. Last month's winner was Tommy Drake from Dundee. Good for him. Then there's the answer form to fill in. Name, address, postcode, the usual drill. Good, no? Oh, and you'll probably be wanting this too. Yeah, cheers N64 Mag. This page is the Mailbox Club 64 section from N64 Magazine. It's where readers get to have their say. Right you are. Looks like they've got a few game reviews in this issue. First up is NFL QB Club 99. Ed Oliver from Worcester wasn't too chuffed, gave it a 75%. Sounds like he thought it was a bit pants compared to Madden 99. Reckons the controls are sluggish, and the AI is rubbish. Then there's F1 World Grand Prix. Chris Charlton from Cambridge was much happier, gave it a whopping 92%. He reckons it's a great F1 game. Realistic and spot-on car handling, all the details are there, even if the stats are a bit dated from 97 and the weather is always cloudy. V-Rally 99 is next. James Midmer from Sheen was a bit harsh with a 61%. He was shocked by the review he read, and thought maybe the reviewer had been on the booze. He doesn't think it looks great, and a tiny nudge on the analog stick sends you flying into rolls and flips. Sounds a bit comical to be honest, but not in a good way. Lastly we have South Park. Hedley Gabriel from Essex is proper buzzing about this one, a massive 95%. He can't believe they only gave it 73% in the main review. He thinks it's brilliant, proper laugh out loud stuff, great single player and even better multiplayer. He says it's just like the cartoon and a must buy, for fans. If you fancy sending in your own review, you can send it to N64 Magazine at that address in Bath. Sounds like good old fashioned snail mail. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, bless it. Seems they're doing a how-to guide, you know, in case you're struggling to kick ass and chew bubblegum at the same time. Daniel Glenfield's written it, and they reckon 0 Hour's a right challenge, packed with levels. They even mention Duke's one-liners and muscles, very important stuff. Apparently, they reviewed it in issue 28 and gave it a whopping 90%, reckon it's a brilliantly executed blasting trip, but a bit samey mind. This month's guide helps you up to the Cyborg Scorpion boss, and they'll finish it off next month. Good of them, really. This page here is a right old blast from the past, isn't it? It's a how-to for Duke Nukem, 0 Hour on the N64, proper late 90s stuff. Remember Duke? Bit of a lad he was. This is from Club 64 Magazine, June 99 by the looks of it, telling us how to get through the first couple of levels. Level 1, Mean Streets. Sounds like a right kerfuffle. Apparently you're straight into it with lizard blokes with blasters. So the first thing is to find some more ammo, classic Duke style. Then it's through a corridor with cola machines and posters for Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Turok, yeah, another N64 classic. Bit of alright that game. Anyway, upstairs, more enemies, then a guardhouse, more enemies. It's just one thing after another in it. Worried. Outside it says watch out, danger lurking round every corner. There's a geezer at Eager Beaver Truckino, who's a bit tough, needs a sniper rifle apparently. If you're a bit knackered health-wise, stand in front of a water hydrant, nice refreshing drink, that's thoughtful. Then it's off to Duke Burger to get a key, and they reckon the slogan there is hilarious. Bet it's something daft like, "Hail to the King, baby," or something. After that, police roadblock, more lizards, then up a ladder to a roof to take out even more aliens from above, using fans as cover. Clever stuff. Power generator needs shutting down, then it's dropping down, getting over a fence, a tank blowing up some police barricade, getting a bit mental now. Now open sign, double doors, pigs inside. What is going on in this game? Big hole in a building, grenade launcher, jumping about, blowing up ledges to get back to Duke Burger. Finally, the subway, aliens on a train, bit of a fight, and level done. Sounds exhausting just reading it. Level 2, Liberty or Death, kicks off with gun turrets, strafing about, shooting grates, dropping down into a passage. High voltage room, flick a switch, open a gate. Then accessible control panel, waterlogged area, lizards again in the dark, control key guarded by spiders. Spiders? Right, not lizards this time then. Main passage, unlock door, next locked door, dive down, passage to a big fan. Pumping station key is behind it, grenade launcher to destroy the fan blades. Sounds a bit overkill for a fan, but hey, it's Duke. Get the key, ladder out of the water, back to large doors. New room, switch to change water level, platform below, open door, swimming, rubble, dry land, service pass, lift, gun turret to the right, door underneath, switch upstairs, lifts, and then finally to the power core, end of level 2. Blimey, sounds like a lot of running around and shooting things. Still, that was Duke for you, wasn't it? Loud, brash, and full of aliens to blast. Good times, good times. This page of the mag is all about cheat guides for Duke Nukem 64. Right then, Level 3, Nuclear Winter, is broken down into sections called Alpha, Beta and Delta. Alpha starts you in a hotel fighting zombies. Always a good time that, and then you need to grab a shotgun to blow open a door. Beta is all about the subway, and more zombies naturally, and running down the right tunnel. Delta has you shooting droids outside a hotel and messing about in some gunk. Sounds charming. You then have to use a transporter and shoot a brain thing to finish the level. Righto, Cheshire. Level 4 is Wet World. Lovely. You're climbing out of water. Apparently you die quick if you don't. Then you're working your way around the top, blasting enemies. After that, you're jumping over to a helicopter, shooting gun turrets and snipers, blowing up barrels. Classic Duke stuff really. Then you dive into more water, find a key, swim around, and climb up a tower to finish the level. Standard Duke action really, if a bit soggy. Looks like they're guiding you through some of the trickier bits, handy if you were stuck on your N64 back then. This page then is having a gander at Duke Nukem 0 Hour, on the N64 of course, seems to be a walkthrough for Level 5 Under Siege and Level 6 Dry Town. Under Siege looks like your typical base type level, tunnels and lifts, all that malarkey. You're grabbing keys like the armory key and laboratory key. Sounds like a bit of backtracking involved, doesn't it always? Apparently there are zombies and spiders knocking about. Lovely. Then Level 6 Dry Town shifts to a Wild West sort of vibe, lively stables, the saloon, the bank, you get the picture. They're mentioning plungers and TNT. Duke wouldn't be Duke without a bit of explosive fun. And there's a bit on how to tackle Boss Pig. Make an English breakfast out of Boss Pig, bit much isn't it? They're saying keep moving and rapid fire, and shotgun if you run out of ammo. Standard boss fight tactics really. Still, Duke Nukem on the N64, it was pretty good for its time. Bit rough around the edges maybe, but good fun, if you were into that sort of thing. This guide is not bad, gets to the point, I suppose that's what you want. This page is a walkthrough for a couple of N64 crackers, Duke Nukem 0 Hour, and Shadow Man. Level 7 of Duke Nukem is Jailbreak. Sounds about right for old Duke. Looks like you're shooting security monitors and gunslinging varmints. Charming. You're grabbing keys and doctor's bags. Classic item collection stuff. Then it's on to Level 8, In a World of Ship for Shadow Man. Seems a bit more moody this game, wading over to islands and using transporters. Unhygienic influences in the kitchen. That's a bit grim, even for back then. Eggs you have to shoot from a distance. Sounds like a faff. Then Level 9 for Duke Nukem again, Fort Nukem, original Cannonballs and boulders flying about, keep running, deal with some aliens, find a lever. Pretty standard stuff for these shooters really, but good fun at the time if you were into blasting aliens and collecting keys. Looking at these screenshots now, they're a bit blocky, aren't they? Still, takes you back. This page shows a how-to guide for Duke Nukem 0 Hour, proper late 90s style. It's for level 10, probing the depth, walking you through the level step by step. Looks like it's all minecarts and lava, classic Duke stuff. They're telling you to hop in minecarts, shoot dynamite pigs, and jump out before you crash. Typical level design of the era, eh? Then there's a section on how to defeat the cyborg scorpion boss. Apparently you need to stick close and circle strafe, and watch out for its spread gun and homing cannons. They reckon its weak spot is its head, which is handy to know. Back then, these tips were gold dust, you'd be stuck on a level for ages otherwise. Good times, if a bit blocky looking back. This page is a blast from the past, isn't it? It's all about winning a mini N64 championship in Monaco Grand Prix. So it's a how-to guide from back in the day for this racing game. Apparently they were giving away a marvelous N64 trophy, which sounds like a bit of alright. The article talks about playing the N64 Grand Prix game, and it's based on a championship across 4 circuits. Monte Carlo, Silverstone, Monza and Hockenheim. Proper racing circuits they are. To win this mini championship, you had to get the quickest aggregate time across these circuits. You had to play in simulation difficulty and in time attack mode. No cheating by racing against other cars, mind you. All about pure speed. Aggle. Then there's a little box called What We Said, which is a review snippet from issue 27 of the magazine. They gave Monaco Grand Prix an 87%, which is a pretty solid score back then. The quote they pulled out says it's fast, furious racing fun by Ubisoft. Can't argue with that, it was a decent racer. The Kukru. Finally, there's a choose your team table, ranking drivers and teams in the game. They've given them some daft names in the game like T Zagitan and N Humiga, but they've kindly told us who they actually are supposed to be in real life. So T Zagitan is Mika Hakkinen, N Humiga is Michael Schumacher, and so on. It goes down to Damon Hill. They've matched them up with teams like McLaren and Ferrari, so you can pick who you want, based on how fast they reckon they are in the game. A bit of fun for choosing your driver, I suppose. This page from Club 64 Mag, right, it's all about getting good at F1 World Grand Prix on the N64. Proper racing game that was. They've got these track guides, see, for Monaco and Silverstone. Monaco first, tightest circuit apparently, and they've broken it down corner by corner, with little maps, speed suggestions, and gear changes. Things like, don't run wide, hard brake, full throttle here, the usual racing advice. They even give you an ideal car setup for Monaco, with wing angles, suspension, tyres and all that jazz. Says soft tyres are the way to go. Then it's on to Silverstone. Track 2 Great Britain, it says. Must be for the overseas readers, eh? Again, same format, track map, corner tips, bits about backing off the accelerator, massive braking, and steady acceleration. Another ideal car setup for Silverstone, slightly different from Monaco. Wings a bit less angled, and mid-body height this time. Good old days of reading magazines for tips, wasn't it? Before everyone just looked stuff up online. These guides were actually quite helpful back then, you know, trying to shave off those vital seconds. Mind you, Monaco in that game, always a nightmare. This page in the magazine, right, it's all about getting faster lap times in what looks like a racing game on the N64. It's got track guides for Germany Hockenheim and Italy Monza. For Germany, they're calling it a power circuit, focusing on speed. There are little numbered sections of the track with tips on how to tackle each bit, like gear changes and braking advice. They even give you an ideal car setup with wing angles, suspension, tyre type, steering angle, brake balance and gearbox ratios. The record lap time they're showing is 1 minute 44 seconds and a bit. Brake banner. Then, underneath, it's the same format for Italy Monza. Another power circuit apparently, where it's easy to get disqualified by cutting corners. Again, track sections, gear and speed tips, and another ideal car setup, slightly different to the German one. The record lap time for this is a bit quicker at 1 minute 15 seconds. At the bottom there's a vroom section. Looks like they're running a competition for Mini Monaco Grand Prix Racing 2 on the N64. You could send in your best times for Monaco, GB, Germany and Italy. They want to know your name and where to send your champagne and trophy if you win. Cheeky sods. It says the time attack records only exist in simulation mode, and you need to send in photos of the screens, good old Game Boy camera probably, to prove your times. They'll add up your times from all 4 races to get your final score and put the best ones in the magazine. Sounds like a bit of a laugh back in the day, trying to get your name in N64 Magazine. This page is all about getting good at a racing game on the N64. Looks like it's maybe Monaco Grand Prix, going by the text on the side. Win the mini N64 championship in Monaco Grand Prix. Right at the top it's got 5 golden racing rules, like some kind of holy scripture for winning races. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Cheshire. Rule number 1 is break in a straight line. Yeah, cheers mate, like we didn't know that. Rule 2 says use an automatic car, and they even admit it's cheating. Blimey, talk about taking the fun out of it. But they do say it's impossibly hard otherwise, which is probably true in fairness. These games back then could be proper tough. Rule 3 is about accelerating gently out of corners. They say tapping the button is the way to do it, otherwise you'll spin out. Again, standard stuff really. Number 4 is about car setup, fiddling with wing settings and gear ratios, you know, the nerdy stuff some people actually get into. Probably best to just stick to driving if you ask me. And Rule 5 is about following the racing line, the dark patch on the track, which is fair enough advice. That racing line thing was always a decent help. Then on the right side of the page, there's an ad for cool collectibles. 1999 mail order catalog it says, for all sorts of tat. Looking at the pictures, it's the usual stuff. Star Wars Episode 1 mini catalog, which would have been a big deal back then I suppose, with all the Jar Jar Binks hype. Says it's packed with collectibles, t-shirts, toys and more. Sounds like the sort of thing you'd get your pocket money burned on, probably full of Beanie Babies and wrestling figures and all that business. You could send a check or postal order to some place in York, or even use your credit card if you were feeling flush. Proper old school mail order vibes here. The next page here is from Club 64, and it's all about how to get through the tough bits in Castlevania on the N64. It's got a big headline shouting, how to beat the hardest parts of Castlevania. Apparently back in issue 27 they reviewed it and gave it a solid 82%, reckon it's full of blood-drenched atmospheric shocks aplenty. Bit much if you ask me, but each to their own. The article itself, by a bloke called Daniel Glenfield, is all about this Schneider chap, Reinhard Schneider to be precise, and apparently we're not supposed to laugh at his name. Right then, they are giving some general tips for vampire hunters, saying if you're new to it you should pick Reinhard as he's more action-packed, whereas Carrie is a bit trickier camera-wise apparently, especially with jumping later on. There's also a tip about a 2-hit combo that only Reinhard can do. Then they get into a specific technique. If you're surrounded by enemies, use the whip to attack one, then quickly stab with the sword using the left C button. Apparently Reinhardt pulls out his sword and keeps the enemies at bay, saving you energy and stopping that annoying whip delay. There are a few little screenshots showing bits of the game, including some tips about jumping over cogs and dealing with vampire attacks. Seems like they're trying to be helpful, bless them. Oh, and it's an N64 star game according to the logo in the corner, so it must be alright then. Page 88, issue 29 by the looks of it. This page then, it's a how-to guide for Castlevania on the N64, back in June 99. Feels like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it? They're calling it Beat the Hardest Parts, bit dramatic, but you know what mags were like. First up, faster damn it, simple enough, mash the A button to run faster, apparently handy for outrunning Chainsaw Eddie, which we'll get to. Then third weapon, they're pushing holy water, saying it's good for lasting flames and damage, especially in the labyrinth. Fair enough, holy water was always a classic Castlevania staple. Finders Keepers is about pressing action buttons near statues and cupboards. Nothing groundbreaking there, just the usual hidden items like money, jewels and food. The usual Castlevania trinkets really. Next, the giant skeleton. Tip is to let it growl a bit, then run in, jump and attack, otherwise you might hit the smaller skeletons. And watch out for its bone swing attack, it'll clear out other skeletons apparently, handy if you're surrounded by the bony blighters. Fire-breathing snakes, nasty things. The advice is to attack the nearest snake, dodge fireballs obviously. They say to hide behind bunkers to avoid the flames, and for the first snake you've got to pop out between flames to attack, otherwise it shoots through the wall, bit of a glitch perhaps. For the second snake, they reckon its flame attacks are easier to avoid. Good to know. Hounds of Hell section, classic Castlevania dogs. Holy water is recommended again, you can grab some from the left tower. Jumping onto a pillar, sounds fiddly. Run to the right platform when they appear, and there's an invisible ledge to grab onto. Use holy water in your whip on the dogs, and apparently if you're playing as Carrie you can use your energy balls but not the charged ones. Dogs are too quick for that. Once the first few are done, more will come from the mansion. Endless dogs, brilliant. Finally, Chainsaw Eddie Labyrinth. Roast chicken for health, always a bonus. In the maze, find the gardener, Chainsaw Eddie, charmingly named. Run to the bridge before Malice, wait for Eddie to get close, then jump over the side. Eddie freezes, attack him, then jump back onto the bridge, collect goodies he drops, and repeat until you're full of chicken and goodies. Once the cutscene is done, run back across the bridge, and make sure you've passed Eddie, before he wakes up. Maze directions given are right, 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 straight on, left at the courtyard, then right to Malice by the door. Top tip, jump and holy water when chased to slow them down, and left C to attack if dogs get too close. After seeing Eddie out of the maze, turn around for a torch on the left, key inside, unlock the gate and get back inside the house. Phew, labyrinth navigation in text form, always fun. So there you have it, a page of tips for Castlevania 64. Feels very of its time, doesn't it? Bit basic, but probably useful back then when we were all figuring these 3D games out for the first time. This page of Club 64 must be from back in '99, isn't it? Looks like they're giving us the lowdown on some proper N64 games. First up, we've got some tips for dealing with your standard house vampire and girl vampire. Keep moving, apparently, if you don't want your neck nibbled, and a bit of holy water is always handy, who knew? Then it's on to carrying the nitro. Sounds like a bit of puzzle solving is needed. You've got to navigate the cog room, grab some nitro, chat to a lizardman, fight some bikers and vampires. All the usual stuff really. Apparently there's some goddess statue puzzle to unlock a wall too. Next we're facing a giant bull. Run around its legs and smack it with a combo. Classic boss tactic really. After that it's Rosa Reinhardt. She's got a set pattern of attacks: sword, energy spin, fire arrows, ground dart. So predictable these game bosses back then. Finally, there's the Fernandez warrior, Carrie. Circle around her and keep shooting, but watch out for her smoky cloud if you get too close. Doesn't sound like she's the sharpest tool in the shed if she just lets you shoot her without trying to dodge. Good times, these old guides, eh? Simple, but they got the job done. This page then is all about how to get past the tricky bits in Castlevania 64 on the N64. Right then, so they're calling out Death, Actress and Dracula as proper hard nuts to crack. For Death, or Reinhardt's death boss fight as they call it, the mag is saying to just ignore his sickles and get in close, jump and whip him. They reckon if you're quick you can take him down before he even uses many spells, which sounds about right. Give it a good thrashing. Then there's Actress, that's Carrie's boss fight. Apparently you need to run in circles around her, a bit like that Fernandez warrior, whoever they were. Jump to avoid the ice pools, and use charged shots. They say to keep smashing the ice pillars she puts up and change direction when you break one, firing energy bolts at her. Sounds like a right faff, but typical boss fight nonsense for the time. And finally, Dracula himself. They reckon before you even fight him, make sure you've got all your bits and bobs from the last level, and you can even find more items by being sneaky around the back of the Count's tower. For the fight itself, they say stand still, and let Drac get close, jump, and whip him in the head to stop him doing his attacks. Fire bats are mentioned, kill them for roast chickens, always handy. Real Dracula is different, they say don't stand still because of fireballs, and swing the camera around when the pools of light appear. Always be moving around basically. And if he does a firewall attack, just stand there and whip him. Bit risky that. You'll take damage but not too much they say. Then they go on about using holy water and whips when he turns into a big beastie in the final incarnation fight. Throw down holy water to burn him and keep whipping him until he's properly destroyed. Standard stuff really. There's also a bit on secrets, how to unlock a harder difficulty by collecting a special one jewel and finishing the game, and then saving after the credits. Reinhardt's second costume is mentioned, you get a key in the Tower of Execution, and then go back up to unlock a door for the special 2 jewel for that. Carrie's second outfit is at the end of the Tower of Sorcery, on a floating platform with a torch, using holy water to find an invisible ledge and grab the special 3 jewel. And Vincent the Vampire, they say if you're too slow getting to Dracula, Vincent gets there first, and if you fail to beat Dracula after that, then that's the bad ending you get. Don't want that, do we? So get a move on. This page from N64 Magazine has got a help wanted ad. Seems they're after, proper gamers to write guides for them. They're dangling excellent rewards, and a special N64 record bag designed by Will Overton to tempt you. Apparently all you have to do is write about a game you're dead good at, but not just any old guide. They want something specific, like hidden bits in games that no one's really covered. They mention things like the death scenes in GoldenEye, or those fairy spots in Zelda, and even the water walking trick in Mission Impossible on the N64. They reckon about 600 words is the sweet spot, and pictures aren't a big deal. Apparently Will and his army of art monkeys will sort that out. Blimey, army of art monkeys, bit much isn't it? You had to send your stuff to some address in Bath if you were keen. Then you've got a how-to guide for Rogue Squadron. David Gosling's put it together to help you find power-ups. He says Rogue Squadron is brilliant, even if it's a bit slow and foggy, reckons it's the best Star Wars game on any console. Strong words. Apparently there are 8 power-ups dotted around the 16 levels to make things a bit easier, especially if you're aiming for gold medals. He's highlighted 3 of them. For the first level, Defection at Corellia, you can grab advanced proton torpedoes after you've saved the prince, flying back to the main city and diving between two tall buildings. Then for the Jade Moon, there's advanced shields. You need to head left and find a crater with turrets, blast them, and a building to get it. Finally, in Imperial construction yards, there are advanced bombs to be had. You have to take out some radars, fly past an AT-AT and some factories, and then shoot a circular building. Each one has a little screenshot to point you in the right direction. Rogue Squadron was pretty good at the time, wasn't it? Nice to see a proper guide back then, before the internet made everything so easy. This page of Club 64 Help Wanted is all about Star Wars Rogue Squadron on the N64, remember that one? It's giving you the lowdown on where to find some power-ups in different missions. Right then, in Prisons of Kessel, it says the Seeker missiles are inside a building, naturally guarded by a turret. For Battle Above Talaran to get advanced blasters, you have to go to Talaran City, and they reckon the AWing is best to get in, but getting out is a pain. Classic N64 difficulty spikes, eh? Escape from Fest has Seeker proton torpedoes hidden behind the research center, in a building guarded by barracks and gun turrets. Lovely. Blockade on Chandrila is for advanced bombs. You just have to take out an ATST that's shooting at some pillars in the city, and boom! Power up for you. Raid on Sullust for more Seeker proton torpedoes is a bit more destructive. You need to bomb a grey square building next to a TIE pad. And finally, Moff Seardan's Revenge gives you cluster missiles for destroying some Bacta containers near an Imperial bunker. Bit of a mix of power-ups there. Seeker missiles and proton torpedoes seem to be the favourites. Then at the bottom there's a how-to section on shaking off missiles, useful back in the day when things could get a bit hectic. For the VWing they say use turbo boost and try and get behind something. For the speeder, veer left and right. For the AWing, hold thrust and fly in circles. Apparently they run out of fuel. And for the X and Y wings, just take out the turrets, or hope R2 can fix your ship quick enough. Good luck with that. Yeah, classic Rogue Squadron tips and tricks. Good times. This page of the magazine, well, it's the tips section, isn't it? Classic N64 Magazine, always there to lend a hand when you were stuck on a game or just wanted to mess about with cheat codes. Jikukuku. First up we've got Snowboard Kids 2. Remember that one? Pretty bonkers snowboarding game, very Japanese. They're showing off how to unlock all the characters, boards and levels, with some button combo at the title screen. Z, B, top C, down on the D-pad, left analog, right analog, up on the D-pad, R, Z and A apparently. Sounds like you'd need 3 hands to pull that off. There's also something about expert mode you unlock by completing the story mode, which is fair enough I suppose. And a head start tip, wait for Mr. Dog to say G go, and then hit B to rock it off. Sneaky. Oh, and you can play as Damien if you finish the whole game in story mode, which is nice for fans of Damien I guess. Gake. Then it's on to Vigilante 8. Vigilante 8. That was a laugh. Car combat with a bit of a 70s vibe, wasn't it? They've got a load of special moves listed, like the Halo decoy and bullseye rockets, showing the button combinations. Up, down, fire, machine gun for the Halo decoy, that sort of thing. And there's a section on unlocking all levels and vehicles with a cheat code JTBT7, CFD1, LRMGW. Bet you had to write that down on a bit of paper. Plus a separate cheat for all vehicles except the alien one, SANGS_unlocked. Always with the passwords, weren't they? They've got more passwords for things like rapid fire weapons, reduced gravity, A_moon_getaway. That sounds like fun. Remove all enemies, population_out. Which is a bit drastic, isn't it? God mode, for invincibility, living_forever. Because of course you want to be invincible. Slow motion, go_really_cello, super hard difficulty, I_am_tough_GUI. Unlock all levels, level_shortcut, and view all endings, long_slideshow. Blimey, they thought of everything. Good old cheat codes, made games last a bit longer sometimes, didn't they? Especially when you were stuck. And they mention a bonus level in Super Dreamland 64, if you complete Alien's Quest. Sounds a bit cryptic. And a tip about a blimp in Nugget City that you can drive into to get power-ups, apparently hidden on top of buildings. Health and missiles from the look of it. Yeah, classic tips page. Always good to have these in the magazine, especially before everyone had the internet in their pocket to look everything up instantly. Simpler times, eh? This page is all about cheats and classic tips for a couple of games. Beetle Adventure Racing and Pilotwings 64. Both on the N64 of course, back in June '99. So, Beetle Adventure Racing, right? Yeah, it was a bit of a laugh. They've got a whole bunch of cheat codes here. To get into the cheat menu, you had to muck about in Championship mode, Coventry Cove, and find a hay bale near a barn. Typical N64 secret stuff, wasn't it? Then, apparently you get a cheats option in the menu. They mention a few car unlocks like the Alien Beetle, if you beat Expert Championship, and the Police Beetle after beating the Bonus Championship. There's also a view mode cheat, which sounds like a bit of fun to mess around with different camera angles. Accessible by finding a daisy crate on Inferno Isle, and then going to options. Then there's the classic tips section, which is about Pilotwings 64. Ah, Pilotwings. Remember that? They're calling it a marvelous game, with wonderful feeling of flight. A bit strong maybe, but yeah, it was alright for its time. Graphically pretty good, for the N64, to be fair. This tip is about warps to the Birdman stars in different levels. Holiday Island is under a rock arch near the golf course. Crescent Island is in a cave on the cliff. Everfrost Island is through a tunnel above the icy falls, and Little States is just slap bang in Central Park, New York. Easy peasy, they reckon. They even say if you see a cheap copy of Pilotwings 64, you'd be a fool not to give it a go, which is pushing it a bit, but each to their own. This page from Club 64, yeah, it's Dr. Kit's game clinic again. Always a bit of a laugh to see what gaming ailments he's diagnosing. Looks like he's back to his usual routine of dancing and singing, apparently while sorting out everyone's gaming problems. It's a regular feature, this, where readers write in with their tricky bits and Dr. Kits offers his expert, if slightly bonkers, advice. Oh. We've got a few queries this time. First up is young Daniel from Aldershot, bless him, struggling with Rogue Squadron on the N64. He's moaning about not having enough time to explore Tatooine before the cutscenes kick in. Dr. Kits, with a touch of Henry VIII for some reason, reckons you just need to blast those probe droids to free up the area. Simple as that apparently. Sand Planet freedom achieved. Rogue Squadron, yeah, good game that was. Looked alright for the time, even if it had its moments, as the little caption box admits. Jurre. Next, Simon in Merseyside is stuck on Turok 2. Level 4, he's on the bleeding satchel charge hunt. Says the level's massive and he wants to know if he has to use explosives. Dr. Kits is all about finding the satchel charge obviously. Says it's hidden after the first thermal vent, near a waterfall. Turok 2, blimey that was a looker back then, all fog and dinosaurs. The caption box calls level 4 tricky, and yeah you could get lost in those levels, Then there's Wayne from Manchester, asking about GoldenEye and killing guards in the depot cutscene. Seems some American chaps told him you can do it without even pulling the trigger. Dr. Kits, playing the evil genius persona now, confirms it's true. Says you can even kill and maim through most GoldenEye cutscenes, especially if you use the all weapons cheat. He suggests using the shotgun and just stepping into the train carriage when the doors open. Loads of blood apparently, but still, feckency. GoldenEye, what can you say? Still holds up, even now. Caption box calls it a great game. But Will's only just finished it, the dear fool. Bit harsh, Doc. Lastly, Arthur from London's having trouble with Zelda. Ocarina of Time, can't kill Ganondorf. Dr. Kits, staring intensely at his mouse, says the issue is light arrows. Tells Arthur to visit the Temple of Time first, for a cutscene to get them. Then, reflect Ganondorf's bolts with the Master Sword, shoot him with light arrows, long shot him over, and give him a couple of wallops. Repeat a few times and see what happens. Ocarina of Time, proper classic, that. Light arrows, long shot Master Sword, brings back memories. Right at the bottom there's the Got a Gaming Query bit. Tells you to write in, even if it's a small question, and post it to N64 Magazine at the Bath address. Bit of a cutout form to fill in your name and address too. Yes, standard stuff for a gaming mag back then, wasn't it? Good old Dr. Kits, always there to sort out your gaming headaches, with a bit of dancing and singing on the side. This page from N64 Magazine, back in the day when we actually got magazines for our consoles, is diving into some Zelda 64 Ocarina of Time questions. As you do when that game came out, everyone was stuck somewhere. It starts off chatting about how many Japanese games were flooding in on the N64, mentioning Pikachu Genki Dechu and Pokemon Snap, and even Shadowgate 64, though they sort of brush over them saying who cares. Which is a bit harsh, but I suppose Zelda was the main event. They were saying Shadowgate 64 was impressive even unfinished, but not to expect the next Zelda just yet cheeky. Jukike. Then it gets into reader questions for Zelda. First up, someone called Edward in Surrey is stuck in Jabu Jabu's belly with Princess Ruto. The answer's all about using the boomerang to deal with electric tentacles, and then gives a little walkthrough on how to get through that bit. Next, Simon from Leicester wants to know about the fishing game and catching a £20 fish at Lake Hylia, and where to find the sinking lure. Apparently it's random, which is a pain, and they mention the Hyrule loach as the biggest fish. Finally, Adam from Colchester's asking about the Scarecrow's song at Lake Hylia. He's taught it as a kid, but it doesn't seem to do much as an adult. The reply explains you need to play your own made UP song to the Scarecrow as a kid, then play it again as an adult near places Navi highlights to use it to reach new spots. Bit of a faff, but that's Zelda for you, always a puzzle to figure out. This page right then is all about the Nintendo hotline back when you had to actually phone up if you were stuck in a game. Imagine that, eh? It's from issue 101 of N64 Magazine, so we're talking June 1999, right in the golden era of the N64 really. Musichoir. So, it's advertising the hotline as a team of expert gamers who can help you out if you are in distress. Bless them, they say they deal with over 2,000 calls a day. Blimey. They were open 7 days a week, which was pretty good going, even doubled their staff at weekends to cope with all the calls. Remember having to actually wait on hold and all that? Madness now in it? It was a premium rate number, naturally, and they tell you to have a pen and paper ready. Good advice that you wouldn't want to forget the crucial tip on how to get past that blooming water temple, would you? Most of the questions are about Zelda, Ocarina of Time. As usual, that game was massive at the time. Someone's asking about the Golden Scale, another about the Silver Gauntlets in the Gerudo training ground, and someone called Bonnie is struggling with a gold skulltula in Dodongo's cavern. Adam is wondering about the Gossip Stones, and if you can get anything from them turning blue, which apparently is a load of old tosh as far as the hotline guys know, but they do give you fairies in bottles and tips if you play songs and talk to them with the Mask of Truth. Helpful, aren't they? Bit cryptic if you ask me, but that was Zelda. Warringtons. There's another question from Bonnie, this time in Denmark, about beating the marathon runner. Apparently, Bonnie's tried several times on Epona, but this geezer is always 1 second faster. They reckon there is no way to beat him, it's just a race for the sake of it. Typical Nintendo trickery there. Always those little side quests you could never quite complete. Bishwa. And finally, they're plugging a new automated service for out-of-hours gaming help. 50p a minute. Get your parents' permission first, mind. Those were the days, eh? This page is all about game challenges, you know, when you've rinsed a game but fancy a bit more to do. It's called 10 Challenges to Test the Best, and it's got a kind of game on title slapped across the top in big letters. They reckon everyone's got games lying around they've finished, but these challenges are supposed to breathe a bit of new life into them. A bit quirky, they say, but doable if you're supposed to be any good. They've even got gold, silver and bronze medals if you manage to nail them, for levels of excellence, bless them. First up is GoldenEye, and it's called Red 'em Up. The challenge is to get an enemy as bloody red as possible. Every inch of them, front and back, apparently. No shotguns or RCP-90s allowed, you've got to use pistols or something. They reckon wait for a guard or Natalia to be near a scientist in a white coat and you get a bonus. Scores are given for coverage 100%, 85%, 70%. Remember GoldenEye? We all rinsed that to death back then, didn't we? Then there's Super Mario 64, with Hatless Floor Show. You have to lose your cap at the start, and then do acrobatics over Bowser in the second confrontation, without chucking him into bombs. Single and double jumps, backflips, cartwheels, all that guff, and you get points for each one. They want you to keep it going as long as you can without grabbing coins. Scores here are for points. 150, 160. Mario 64 still holds up, to be fair. Next is Zelda. Ocarina of Time, potty training. Cheeky. You've got to smash all the pots inside the guard's house in the castle market, quick as you can. They suggest sword and spin attacks, maybe bombs to get started, and using the slingshot for pots on ledges. Scores are in seconds, 20, 30, 40. Zelda, what a game that was, everyone was blown away by it at the time. Lastly, there's Mario Kart 64, Coupe Mode. You play a two-player Grand Prix, but you agree not to kill each other. One person drives normally, the other just goes for power-ups, especially the Thunderbolt, to squash computer carts and let your teammate win. They suggest DK's Jungle Parkway or Royal Raceway. Scores are in kills, 12, 8, 4. Mario Kart 64, great for a laugh with your mates, wasn't it? Good times. This page is all about challenges for your N64, typical stuff from back in the day, to be fair. First up, it's F-Zero X, the challenge is called Retirement Attack. They want you to be a right menace on the track, playing on expert and just trying to bump all the other racers off. Sounds a bit cheap if you ask me, but alright. Well, whirl. Then there's Wave Race 64, with a Stunt Master challenge. This is more like it, showing off a bit. They want you pulling off donuts, sitting backwards, and even handstands on your jet ski during a race. 6 donuts gets you a bronze, sitting backwards a silver, and a handstand a gold. Fair play for the handstand. ISS 98. 64ths, gets a look in with Go Pele. It's all about scoring screamers from miles out in the footy. They've got targets for 50, 40 and 30 meters for bronze, silver and gold. Depending on if you're on ISS 64 or ISS 98, they suggest different button combos for getting the curl on your shot. Tricky stuff. Yeah. Pilot Wing 64 is up next with Death Wish. A bit dramatic in it. This one's about skydiving on Holiday Island and hitting targets after breaking through the clouds. They've got specific targets listed. A boat, steps, and a cave for bronze, silver and gold. Sounds like a right laugh, crashing into things deliberately. Turok 2 gets a nod with Multiplayer Master. This is just about having a good old frag with your mates in multiplayer. Standard crossbow and medieval weapons only, apparently, and they suggest turning off the cerebral bore and scorpion launcher, probably to keep it a bit fairer. Score is the name of the game, and less deaths is better for your score. Lastly, Rogue Squadron gets a speeder race challenge. This is on the Mos Eisley level, and you have to race in an AW-ing, without shooting anything except probe droids at the start. They say watch out for land speeders and buildings. Camera angle is important apparently, with different camera views getting you different medals. Furthest view, with no brakes for gold sounds properly hairy. So yeah, that's the page. 10 challenges to keep you busy if you were bored back in June '99. Good bit of fun, I suppose. This page then, it's all about proving you're the best gamer, as if we needed another excuse. They've called it I'm the best a bit much in it. They're going on about their best leagues and how they're always changing, and this month, drumroll please, it's Mario Party. Apparently people have been showing off their impressive scores, and they're giving a shout out to Gavin Egger for his Mario Party prowess, spinning that analog stick like he's trying to generate electricity. Then there's the new high score section. Last time they wanted quick times for GoldenEye, on the dam level, and now it's F-Zero X, on the spaceplant track. Prize is a Macapad, one of those slightly odd-looking controllers. Oh, and there are tables of GoldenEye times for different levels: Caverns, Bunker 2, Control, Cradle and Dam. Seems like Richard Dunn and Stephen Zwarches are doing alright, topping a few of those, and it's mostly names from around the UK, with a few lads from Holland and Belgium chucked in as well. This page, right then, let's have a look. It's the contact page. Looks like the back page is where all the readers got in touch. Bit of a classified section really, for the N64 Massive. Gua. Kicking off with fanzines, bless 'em. People were still making those, weren't they? If you wanted cheats, you had to send off a stamped addressed envelope and 30p. Can you imagine? There's a website called Zelda GuideNet, which sounds like it was cutting edge back then, the only dedicated webpage on the internet. And someone's flogging their Endzone fanzine, packed with news and reviews for £1. Then we get to games to swap, and this is where it gets interesting. Loads of people trying to swap their games. Loads of wrestling games like WGET World Tour and WCW vs NWO World Tour. Everyone was mad for those at the time. Someone wants to swap Mario Kart 64, the absolute classic, for Lilac Wars. Or Rogue Squadron as some people called it, or Rogue Squadron. Seems fair enough. Loads of shoutouts for GoldenEye, naturally. Turok 2, and the usual suspects like Wave Race and Banjo-Kazooie are floating about. Someone's even trying to swap Doom and Shadows of the Empire for Mario Kart 64. Bit cheeky that. Mortal Kombat Trilogy gets a mention too. People were still into that gorefest. Cool. Games wanted next, and someone is desperate for Final Fight 1 or 2 for the SNES, paying a tenner. Hexen is wanted too, must be in good condition. They're offering up to £20. Someone's after decent SNES RPGs, especially Shadowrun, proper old school. And of course Zelda, Rogue Squadron, and all the usual big hitters are on people's wish lists. Pac-Man for the Game Boy is also on someone's mind. Finally, someone wants Zelda 64, and is willing to pay up to £35 for it. Boxed with instructions, that's not bad actually. Worry, Help Wanted section is pretty quaint. Someone's stuck on Zelda trying to figure out the Spirit Temple, and another person wants action replay codes for GoldenEye. Pre-internet help requests, that's what this is. And finally, pen pals. People looking for mates who like N64 and Zelda. Proper old school pen pals. For actual letters, mental isn't it? Someone wants a pen pal who likes N64 and The Simpsons. Times have changed, haven't they? This page is all about Nintendo's family trees, looking at the lineage of games, like where they all came from, and how influential they were back in the day. It starts off with a list of what they consider essential N64 games like Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, GoldenEye 007, Wave Race 64, Pilot Wing 64, and others like Banjo-Kazooie, F-Zero X, Lilac Wars, IS-98, and Mario Kart 64. They reckon these are all top-notch games, and quite right too. Most of them were brilliant. The article talks about how these games are either top-notch or genre-defining, and how it's obvious that they are good games. It touches on how games like Super Mario 64 redefined 3D Mario and set the standard Mario. Then it moves on to categorizing games, starting with good. Under good, they've got Half-Life for the PC, which is a bit of an odd one out for an N64 mag, but alright. They mention its strong player interaction and satisfying intelligent enemies. Next up is middling, and here they've stuck Metal Gear Solid for the PlayStation, and again, bit weird for an N64 mag, but it was a big game at the time. They say it was directly related to NES and SNES Metal Gear games, which is true enough, but middling? Bit harsh maybe. Lastly, they get to GoldenEye 007, under the heading EY Iconic. They call Wolfenstein 3D the granddaddy of first-person shooters, and say GoldenEye set the template for years to come. It's got a picture of Bond, Pierce Brosnan, looking all suave. They're talking about how GoldenEye influenced first-person shooters forever. So, overall it's a look back at the big Nintendo games, and how they connect to other influential titles, even ones on different platforms. It's trying to show the family tree of gaming, I suppose. A bit of a random selection of games to compare, but it gives you a flavor of what was hot, and what influenced what back then. This page in N64 Magazine, harking back to June '99, is all about first-person shooters, which, let's be honest, were pretty much ruling the roost back then, weren't they? Right at the top, they're still banging on about GoldenEye 007, calling it an unheard-of emphasis, and the best console shooter ever. Bit much maybe, but it was good, I'll give them that. Then there's Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, looking like it's trying to ride on GoldenEye's coattails with the sniper rifles and gadgets but in third person. Turok 2, Seeds of Evil gets a proper rave review, apparently it's a masterpiece, and they're really going on about the superb hit location, which sounds a bit gruesome when you say it out loud, but it's dinosaurs in it. Can't go wrong with dinos. Warrington. Then they're talking about the PC lot, Quake, Duke Nukem 3D, Quake 2. Quake, they call it a classic, which it was. Proper Doom clone. Duke Nukem 3D, they reckon it's alright but a bit dull now. Quake 2, apparently, is the king of PC shooters until Half-Life came along. Good graphics and all that. Rapport? Perfect Dark is the big one though, isn't it? Rare's follow-up to GoldenEye. They're proper hyping it up with the Brilliance Incarnate line. Female lead and all that, bit trendy at the time. Sounds like it's building on GoldenEye, which is exactly what you'd want, isn't it? Months away though, typical. Then they get a bit snarky about some other games. Sin, PC shooter, apparently came out at the wrong time, in the shadow of Half-Life. They're saying it's a bit like a Bond simulator, boring weapons and all. Ouch. Rainbow Six sounds a bit more serious. Tom Clancy game, tactical and all that, complex planning. They say GoldenEye started a trend for this kind of thing. Warrington. Tomorrow Never Dies on the PlayStation gets a bit of a kicking. Bond game again, but they say it's lost the passion of GoldenEye and the driving bits are dreadful. Mission Impossible, another N64 game, sounds like a bit of a disaster. Trying to be like GoldenEye but failing badly with dodgy AI and iffy graphics. Brave attempt, they say, bless 'em. So yeah, shooters everywhere. GoldenEye casting a long shadow over everything else, it seems. June '99, good times for blasting things in the face, eh? This page, titled Super Mario, and adorned with a cheeky-looking 3D Mario, delves into a retrospective look at Mario games and some contemporary titles that are being compared to the Italian plumber's legacy. Starting with the Coins We Trust section, we see Donkey Kong, the old arcade cabinet game from '81, being mentioned as the first time Mario, or Jumpman as he was originally known, appeared, and as a villain no less. Then there's Super Mario Bros. From '85 on the NES, described as a revolution with fluid controls and secrets galore, which is fair enough, it was a proper game changer. Moving on to good, we've got Banjo-Kazooie, a rare title for the N64 from '98. It's called a Super Mario 64 clone, but apparently, it's actually better in some ways, with great graphics and tons of ideas, remaining a stone-cold classic. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon is next, another N64 game from '98. This one is a 3D RPG romp, compared a bit to Mario 64 again, but with its own voice characters, and a Japanese sense of weirdness. Fair play to Konami for that. Lastly in good is Glover from Hasbro, also '98 on the N64. It's described as a resounding success with clever glove and ball mechanics, ensuring it its place as a superior Mario 64 wannabe, with a touch of sarcasm there, I think. Then we move to middling. First up is Tomb Raider 13 for the PlayStation, rated 13 stars. Despite big levels and atmosphere, Lara Croft's early adventures are criticized for being hobbled by awkward camera and clunky D-pad control, which, yeah, they were a bit. Spyro the Dragon, another PlayStation game from '98, gets a mention as being a bit easy and cuter than your average Nintendo game, but still with colorful 3D worlds, and he breathes fire. Finally in middling, is Chameleon Twist on the N64 from Sunsoft, also 98. It suggested you can finish it in a weekend, but the tongue-licking ideas are novel, especially in multiplayer, though it's only above average effort. Lastly, there are some more Mario games highlighted down the side, from Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES in 88, which apparently let you play as Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, and Toad. Then Super Mario Bros. 3 from 89, also NES, mentioned for selling millions of copies and being the biggest and best Mario yet, at the time. And finally, Super Mario World from 90 on the SNES. This one is described as distilling everything great about Mario into a game graphically miles ahead of what came before, and it really was something special back then on the SNES. This page in N64 Magazine, back in June 99 it seems, is all about creating your own gaming family tree, whatever that means. They've got their own example here, breaking games down into good, bad, and something called Super FX game, which is a bit niche. In it, in the good section, they're banging on about Yoshi's Island on the SNES, calling it a glorious swan song for that console. Fair enough, it was pretty special at the time, with its crayon style and all that. Then there's Super Mario 64, which they reckon was the first game to get 3D right, and to be fair, it was a bit of a revelation, wasn't it? They're properly gushing about it, calling it a timeless classic. Interestingly, they're even previewing Super Mario 64 too, which they say is just a prototype kicking about at Nintendo. Apparently it had Luigi in it, and maybe two-player, but sounds like it might never happen, which is a bit of a shame, isn't it? The Super FX game bit is about this unreleased SNES game that used the Star Fox chip. Apparently they were going to do a fancier version, but Shigsy held back and used the tech for Mario 64 instead. They even mention Argonaut's Polygon Fighter, reckon it would have looked rubbish on the SNES compared to the N64. Bit of techie talk for ya there. Down in the bad corner they're properly laying into some games. First up is Croc on the PlayStation. They're calling it a rubbish Mario ripoff, with no charm and boring 3D worlds. Ouch. Then there's Gekweng 64, which they thought had promise but ended up being a right pain with terrible voiceovers and a shocking camera. And finally Starshot, Space Circus Fever, which at least they say tries a bit, but it's too hard and frustrating with annoying pixel-perfect jumping. Sounds like a right laugh, not. Right at the bottom they're asking readers to send in their own family trees with their favorite Nintendo games, divided into good, middling and bad. If you're lucky you might win a wonderful N64 record bag. Blimey, get your skates on, eh? This page is shouting about all the E3 buzz, saying they're gonna bring us the latest news on the greatest new games. They've even got a bit of E3 tat to give away in a competition, a press badge thingy, fancy that. Looks like they're properly excited about a few games. There's Perfect Dark, which everyone was hyped for after GoldenEye, Donkey Kong 64 with what looks like some banana collecting action, Resident Evil probably still scaring the pants off everyone, and Turok 3, more dino blasting fun. They've also got Grand Theft Auto 64, blimey, on the N64. F1 World Grand Prix 2 for you racing fans, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer Pod Racing and all that, and 12 Tales, Conker 64, which was supposed to be all cute and cuddly before it turned into something a bit different later on. Down below they've been having a go on Duke Nukem 0 Hour, reckon it's pretty good for some mindless blasting. And Vigilante 8, yeah that was a laugh, smashing up cars with rockets. Looks like next month they're gonna have a gander at some Game Boy stuff too, showing off Rugrats and Top Gear Pocket. All in all, looks like they're trying to keep us N64 owners happy with what's coming next. Fair enough, I suppose. The next page is shouting about issue 30, apparently the biggest ever issue, at 148 pages, blimey. It's all about E3, they're saying be at E3. Shoo, even though it's saved for another month, but they are still going to cover it and say it's as fantastic as ever. It mentions being at E3 in Los Angeles, only an N64 magazine, getting all the details and excitement in N64 30ths. Bit cryptic that. Then there are some little yellow dots pointing out what's inside, like, first news on the latest N64 games, tons of new cheats and tips, Japanese and American game reviews, Skill Club 64, bragging I'm the best, loads of prizes, and the only reviews you can trust. Bit cheeky that last one, in it? Fwah. They're also showing off some games being reviewed. There's Premier Manager 64, looks like a football management sim. Then there's Armorines, some sort of bug blasting game, and Shadow Man, which was supposed to be a bit spooky and atmospheric. Down below there's WWF Attitude, all the wrestling madness, Shadowgate 64, another spooky one perhaps, and Carmageddon 64 for some vehicular mayhem. And it says, and a whole lot more besides, very mysterious. It's on sale Tuesday the 15th of June, and there's another surprise free gift. It's the best giveaway we've ever had. Warrant always with the free gifts to tempt you, weren't they? Independent Nintendo Magazine it says at the bottom. June 1999 at the bottom right there. Those were the days, eh? This page right then, let's have a look. It's a what if Jatai's piece, and crikey, it's about Duke Nukem. But hold on a minute, it's not the Duke we know. Apparently this new Duke game is set with him as an actual English Duke, not some American action hero type. They're saying it's loosely based on 0 Hour, but this time Duke is from proper posh stock. Tia. The article bangs on about how they wanted Duke to be relatable for family history gamers, and the game even comes with a 600-page book. Blimey. The main game idea sounds completely off the wall, like a Pokemon meets Tamagotchi, but with posh people. You're wandering around Duke's massive house, collecting these inbred aristocrats and then, get this, inbreeding them even more. Apparently, there are 150 different types you can get, depending on which chinless wonder you pair with a horse-faced old crone. You lock them in a room and breed them. Madness. Gameplay sounds like a right laugh, with sub-games about hunting animals and even members of the royal family. Apparently, the Duke's bulldog is trained to kill anything that's not blue-blooded. The slogan they're suggesting is, "Gotta try 'em all," which is a bit cheeky. They mention a Metal Gear Solid style bit, sneaking around boarding school, and even zombie wizard targets. Sounds like a right mixed bag. Over on the side there's the index for issue 29, typical stuff. Bits and bobs like an ear to the ground, Club 64, contacts, directory, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, E3 preview, fanzine farm and hotline tips. Then there's how-to, guides for beating bits of Castlevania and kicking ass in Duke Nukem, handy for the youngsters. Also, how to be a champion in Monaco Grand Prix 64, and how to find power-ups in Rogue Squadron. Previews for F1 World GP2, Gomon 2, Jet Force Gemini, Mario Golf. Reviews for things like Lode Runner, Michael Owen's Future Look, and Monster Truck Madness Future Look are in there. Probably guessing what games he'll be into, multiplayer results, news, new goods, and what's coming next month. Nintendo Family Tree and Planet Game Boy sections, Player's Choice reviews, Pokemon Snap review and Premier Manager 64 is mentioned too. Quake 2 preview, Rampage Universal Tour review, Reader reviews, Release list, Retro World, Sarge's Heroes preview, Shadowman preview, Skill Club 64, Star Wars Episode 1, Racer Special Investigation, Subscriptions and Triple Play 2000 review. Tips extra, welcome to N64 and this very what if page. Winback preview, WWF Attitude preview. Blimey, that's a lot of stuff packed in. They're even saying this Duke Nukem game is planned for the Queen Mother's 200th birthday, which is clearly a wind-up. Release dates are listed at the bottom, Tuesday the 18th of May and Tuesday the 15th of June for the next issue. Right then, quite a page, bit bonkers this Duke Nukem idea, but could be a laugh.